used over and over and over again in that terminology to go against the LGBT groups. And so it has been used as a term of like hate towards the LGBT groups. And so I would say that I disagree with them banning the word. I would disagree with Twitter banning a lot of things, but it is their prerogative to ban it. I just disagree with that. I think that if they're able to post it on Twitter, then you're able to combat it in front of everybody. Whereas if they go to a different site that's going to allow it, then you've completely lost the ability to combat it in front of everybody. And now you're just combating it in front of their own audience, which is already going to hate you. And so if we leave it on Twitter, you can combat it through intellectual thought instead of through censorship.
I'll jump in. Basically, I think that I don't really care what the alt-right is or the mainstream right or whatever are trying to rebrand grooming as. And they're trying to say that grooming is always sexual. So that's clearly a deviation from our historical meaning of the term. This is... it's just a cope. They're trying to say that grooming is always sexual, but then if you're talking about anything gay, that's grooming. And that is playing on the dual meaning of the word. So it's both sort of deteriorating the meaning of words, which means we should really be mocking them. And so banning the term is taking away that tool of mockery, which is not a good play. So who cares if you feel offended when you're called a groomer? Call them a groomer back. They're pushing their ideology on children, and that makes them a groomer, right?
Okay. Sure, I'll jump in. I think banning words has always been within kind of the purview of hate speech. We've done it before. That's why multiple slurs are banned from most social media platforms. I think banning words isn't the same as actually non-platforming, and I'm very opposed to non-platforming, but you can argue about ideas without using very specific words. The reason why they're banning it is it's actively being used to just be prejudicial against distinctly LGBTQ individuals. And it feels like the conservatives are finally looking at the culture war and figuring out effective things. And the reality is the left did this first, right? They stole a lot of different psych words like pedophilia or narcissism or ADHD and all sorts of terms. And they broadened them to mean a bunch of shit and have weaponized them as well. This is the same stuff. I think we have to have the same response, which is no. It's not grooming. Grooming is very specifically a predatory act of maneuvering. It is trying to get a dependent individual to trust you more, all of their friends and family, with the idea of getting them vulnerable so that you can do abusive, typically sexual behavior with the minor. Applying it here is just silly. It's not grooming. It's kind of as simple as that. If there is actual grooming going on, call out actual individual cases of grooming. Other than that, I think the rest is just kind of dumb.
Okay, last but not least, Dooby.
So yeah, I don't think that banning the word is an admittance of there being truth to it. Though I do think that there is some truth to it. But that being said, I think that banning it is just a continuation of the kind of ideological censorship that we kind of expect from Twitter and all these kind of major tech orgs. That being said, I think that lefties or progressives, quote unquote, should just kind of embrace that there is some aspect of grooming occurring, right? And I don't mean toward any kind of sexual end. I don't mean that they are trying to make kids gay or trans or whatever, or that they're trying to molest children. And I think that on the Republican side, that's kind of how they're using grooming, right? Most of the time, right? But I think we need to accept that, hey, if you normalize these things, these lifestyles, gay, lesbian, trans, whatever, you're gonna see more of it pop up. You're gonna see more kids, experimenting with their sexuality, which is something that you see in households where they do have LGBT parents. The children in those households tend to be far, 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 far more likely than the general population to be LGBT themselves when they're adults, right? Far more likely, right? So I think that we just need to accept that, hey, if we're normalizing these things, there's got to be more of it. And there is a way in which you can twist it into saying, hey, we're grooming society or grooming these children into thinking a certain way about sex and gender. And maybe just accept that as a reality. Don't deny that, hey, kids are going to experiment if you teach them this shit at some point.
So, okay, we'll open it up.
Okay. The left-handed path is demonic. Anyone who writes with their left hand is going to hell. I hate that we normalized left-handedness. you're all groomers because you let people who are left-handed practice their left-handedness.
I mean, that's a fair point, right? Like, as soon as we do normalize things more, which is a good thing, by the way, it's a good thing that we're normalizing people being able to
an
be
extent.
who they are, right? I think that, again, though, like, we cannot use, our line cannot be, right? Like, this word or term offends me, and so I'm going to make sure no one ever uses it again. Like, for example, if calling, like, a lot of cops get offended when you call them a fascist, right? They take severe umbrage to it, okay? But just because their fifis are hurt doesn't mean we should ban the ability to call cops fascist if we want, right? In the same way, right? We shouldn't ban this word just because it hurts people's fifis and it may or may not be true. It's not the truth of the matter that's at stake here. Like, we can find the truth of the matter through discussion. And I think that when it comes to whether or not this is grooming, obviously not the way they are meaning it, right? But when you talk about opening up society more and normalizing things more, absolutely. But that's absolutely okay.
Matter of the fact that we're not bringing up that there are several times to which this term was used correctly is insane, because that's what people who are calling LGBT people groomers, that's what they're basing it off of. They're basing it off of I've seen this crazy clip in which this possibly could have been considered grooming and very well could have been grooming. And so they're using it in that terminology, but they're basing it off off of the crazies. And if we're going to start banning words that people are hurt by, why is Nazi not banned? The Nazi has been used against the right over and over and over again, calling the right Nazis, etc. and so on. Why is it okay to call a police officer a pig? That's obviously not meant to in any good shape or form. So why are these words still allowed when you're talking about it's only the matter of the fact of who this offends? If it offends LGBT, if it offends a minority at that point in time, then they start to ban the word. But if it offends the majority, there's not much that's willing to be done about it. Twitch broke this trend earlier this year with the C word, and so they broke that trend in which the C word was actually banned off Twitch and people got banned for saying it. But with that being said, that's a breaking of the trend. It's not the trend in and of itself.
I mean, they really actually cracked down on people for making the illusion of a white person's race, like some saltine emotes got removed. They didn't explicitly ban people, but there was definitely a little more than naive banning of the term for a buttery bread-like snack with maybe a little salt on top.
I think Spartacus raises a really interesting point, which is, like, first of all, we know that in general, most big tech does seem to have a pretty staunch left-leaning bias and therefore offers way less protection to right-leaning ideas and stuff, which I think is kind of shitty, right? So you could kind of resolve this in two ways. We could start banning words that are also really offensive to call right-leaning people, like Nazi and fascist, or we could resolve this in another way, right? It seems to be the case that when there is a protected group, we confer them different protections than other groups. So like a minority group, for example, like transgender people and LGBTQ, who have a very, very long history of being highly prosecuted, highly attacked, and actually victimized for just their immutable characteristics, we would consider that oftentimes a protected group. And then there are certain protections, for example, barring them and protecting them from hate speech, that we might confer to this protected group.
That's specifically a Canadian thing. In America, at least, constitutionally, we have no protections for hate speech to any group.
It's a hate speech enhancement. If you commit,
what does that mean?
Okay, well, let me tell you. If you commit a crime on someone and the motivation is determined to be for a protected characteristic, that's a hate speech enhancement. So
you mean a hate crime?
A hate crime? Or no? Yeah, no, that's right. I'm so confused. Yeah, so it's not a crime in and of itself, but it is an enhancement. And it is related to the speech of the people involved. Certainly, that's the way you prove it.
Certainly, but it cannot be just the speech, right? Like,
right.
No one is arrested just for being, for saying naughty words at even a protected class or group, right? Like no one is arrested in America for that. It is the actions
It depends.
that come after.
It depends. It can be considered. It can be considered disrupting the peace, and oftentimes
fighting
it
words,
is considered
yeah.
disrupting the peace.
Well, let's look at fighting words, right? The reason we have fighting words exception for the First Amendment is because in the 1930s, Jehovah's Witness called a cop a fascist, and they wanted to prosecute him. So that's why the fighting words was put in. So we don't want, this has since been walked back over and over and over again by rulings, right? Like, yeah, if you go out in the public square, right, and disrupting the peace, these things, they can happen, but just for insulting someone and using derogatory terms.
Doesn't it seem like this is more because I think the point that Erudite brought up about like protected groups is interesting, but it feels like this is more like the groomer thing is aimed more like an ideology than like a specific group. Right? So people pushing gender ideology or gender nonconformity or whatever it is, right? It seems like they're the ones being called groomers and not specifically LGBT people. Right. So do you guys think it'd be reasonable to extend that kind of like protection to like ideological leanings that people might have?
You're right about that. You're right about it.
Just take one step further. I'm sorry, because
okay.
I think this would like if you were, I think it'd make sense for Republicans to say, hey, why don't you ban people from calling us Nazis all the time, right? With all the weight that being called a Nazi has attached to it.
I mean, I would argue that you're 100% right about that. This word is aimed towards thought groups, and the thought groups are the ones experiencing the hate. I would say that LGBT takes up a large percentage of that thought group, and it's used a lot more against LGBT people when they're in that thought group. And I would argue that it's used against them a lot more when they're in that thought group, but I would say that it generally is aimed at the thought group versus just LGBT.
The issue with the thought group and the community is that they overlap a ton, and the thought group is often kind of viewed in many ways in tandem and in support of that community. So to like disentangle them fully is really difficult, right? So when you're calling somebody a groomer, for example, yes, we're talking about educators, but I don't know if you guys know about like the Cabela's drama that happened in Canada. It's Canada, so probably nobody cares. But basically, an LGBT pride group approached a food place and asked if they would be willing to sponsor them for Pride Month. And they basically responded by calling them a bunch of names, like including groomers, right? And at this point, there was no information about whether they were educating children. There was no information. They were just called groomers because they were part of this group. So the idea that like groomers is actually only targeting the educators, maybe that's how it started, which I would still argue is probably like a very inaccurate use of the word grooming, but it has kind of necessarily bled into the community at large because the advocacy and the community are very intertangled.
And it's basically
for sure.
blood libel. It's this old sort of label. Just any gay person is a pedophile or is, you know, it's similar. Right. Certainly to the traditional, you know, if you're Jewish, you do XYZ thing. And that's why I'm describing it as blood libel. Okay, Dooby?
Or like every Trump supporter is a Nazi and a racist and wants to kill all the black and brown people.
I mean, if there's evidence, that's the best defense against libel.
Well, I mean, there is evidence that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just have a question. I mean, could it be that the reason why these words are different is because one implies criminality and the other one doesn't?
One implies the intent to like genocide people. I think it's still pretty bad.
It's an effective political tool, right? To expand the definition of words that are bad, that are contextually viewed by society as horrific, and then labeling whatever group you want to label them as. And this is super effective politically, left, right, and center, right? Like again, all cops are bastards is a thing, right? You know, everyone on the right is some form of white supremacist or Nazi. They can't just be wrong. Your enemies can't just be wrong. They have to be evil. And it's an effective tool in this like social media that environment that we live in that just signal boosts that shit to the moon. And the right is kind of, the left had it for a while, but the right's picking it up, right? And so they're doing the exact same thing when it comes to groomers. It's as Erudite mentioned, not how colloquially it's ever meant, and they're expanding the definition, trying to target this group in order to make them politically unpalatable, right? So that they can be targeted, and they can pass laws such as anti-trans bills and other legislation that can target them.
I think the underlying problem is that we have become too tribalistic. We have become so bifurcated that we look at each other as enemies. And instead of looking at the spectrum of political views and saying, I fall at this end of the spectrum on this issue, but not on every issue, suddenly we have to be at what end or the other, and we can't get anything done because we keep treating each other like the enemy.
Preaching to the choir. It's called reciprocal radicalization, gang, right? Where both sides push each other to the outward fringes. Because again, if you honestly think that your enemy isn't just, wrong, but is actually a Nazi or actually grooming children, right? Like if you actually believe that this is happening, is you are willing to do much more things and go harder on the paint than if you just have different opinions and tax codes.
Wait, so can I drag it back?
This was
to
used
the
before.
grooming
This
thing?
was I can drag it back. This was used prior to grooming, when there was a very, very small percentage of the people in the LGBT community who were trying to push for pedophilia to be added into the LGBT group and add them into the community. It was pushed back against by the large majority of the community, but there's still that very small percentage that was hyper blasted, and it was essentially like, this is what they're wanting to do. And people decide not to look into this. They decide to take people at what it's worth when they say it, and when they see it, they're like, "Oh shit, that's actually what they want to do." It's the same thing with grooming. Is they've taken this very, very small percentage of people, and they've been showing that, like, this is what's happening with this community, and then people see it and they decide not to look any further into it. They decide that that's it. So this guy said it, and I saw what he put out there, and so therefore LGBT must be a bunch of groomers. So with that being said, like that's kind of where that lies, and it's happened over and over and over again. I do agree with Godless Granny that it's because we've become so divided. If we could see each other as Americans again and see each other as working towards the same goal, just maybe like trying to take different paths to that goal, I think we'd be much better as a society. We'd be able to get a lot more things done versus seeing each other as you're my enemy and I must defeat you.
Sure,
Yeah.
also,
So I was just going to say, so the banning of the word, I think it's within the purview of the business to do, because banning a word doesn't ban an idea, right? In my view, if you ban the word Nazi, people can still talk about how you have certain policies and fascistic stuff without using the big ooga booga word. The issue is that it's stupid, right? It's reactionary and typically unhelpful, the issue is a lot of these social media platforms are in large part responsible for the level of extremism that we're starting to see on both sides. And the way that the social media companies are responding is with reactionary band-aids. And the issue is that there's not a lot of space. How can we ever talk about, for example, what Dooby's talking about, where there is kind of this element of social contagion piece to the LGBT movement that does have to be talked about when it comes to kids. We can't talk about it now because if you even mention it, now it sounds like you're just agreeing with people who are calling LGBTQ people groomers, right? It's so impossible. So it's I understand the banning of the word from a reactionary standpoint, and I just I don't put a lot of moral weight on companies at a descriptive level. Yeah, there's no functional way to talk about it.
So
I'm not really
it's a good
sure where this enters into having a mixed age or an all ages social space. It's pretty well and distinct in America. I don't know if Canada you have a big outcropping of dry bars or non-alcoholic clubs, but here in America it's pretty much 21 and up kind of gets its own cage, and you absolutely don't interact between the all ages and the 21 up unless you're pretty well identifiable as a creep. So what is the, legit conversation that happens maybe it's in Canada?
I'm not sure quite where you're talking to. If we're talking about social media, it's obviously constantly a blending of different generations. I mean, we have 12-year-olds lying about their age to get on Reddit all the time.
Okay.
And they're joining different things. So when I'm talking about, like, I don't know what you mean precisely, but I think, like, when we're talking about social media, it's inherently a blending of all of these age groups.
Okay, so it's online. It's the social danger of being online.
Yeah. I was talking about social media.
All right. So that's how you could talk about it. You could talk about the social danger of being online and lying about your age and having cross age group social relationships. It doesn't have to be an LGBT thing.
I understand the issue is, like, if we're talking about, for example, like young adolescent girls are particularly susceptible to social contagion, right? That's why we're seeing a lot of young girls who are on TikTok developing Tourette's. It's not because they have which Tourette's is typically, there's a much more biological thing in the brain. And so that development is really strange because in large part, like, young girls' brains seem to be, like, particularly highly flexible. And so, like, if we see kind of like a over normalization of any type of popular behavior. This is kind of like in the like late 90s, we saw cutting kind of really explode in young teen girls, kind of the same thing. They were spending a lot of time on Tumblr, and it was kind of getting, like, romanticized and glorified to, like, be a cutter in, like, this kind of, like, I'm beautifully broken type way. And so we saw this explosion of the cutting behavior in young teens. And so when we're getting onto social media, what I'm saying is, like, we're not even able to have the conversation around, like, is there some effective social contagion going on in the LGBTQ community that isn't sinister? Like, there's no Machiavellian plot of the LGBT community to be like, let's convert all of the children. That's not what's happening. It's all passive and indirect, and it might not even be sinister, but we can't even talk about it. Like, even now when I'm talking about it, everyone is hearing me and being like, oh God, she must hate trans people. I'm just like, literally, obviously not.
Is being trans a social contagion? Because you're really soying out about this,
this
the
is
label.
A good example.
Am I soying out?
I'm an expert.
The answer to that is yes.
Okay, wait. Let's go to Dooby and then Wick, maybe. Yeah.
So the answer to that question, right? Is trans being is that a social contagion, right? Obviously not in every case, right? Some people are just trans, right? But there is tons of evidence now, as we're learning more about this, as more research is being done, that a lot of kids are falling into this and thinking they're trans when they're not. Right, you can go to the there's a study that said, like, up to, like, 90% of them are not actually trans, like trans children who identify themselves as trans, not have, like, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and now that have gone through, like, puberty blockers, that just identify as trans. Right? About 90% of those kids are not actually trans, but that's a controversial study, so we can set it aside, and we just look to Sweden's like medical board. I forget what the actual term is. And they've been very inclusive, very accepting of trans children, trans things for years. And very recently, I think like 4 months ago, they totally redid the way that they handle trans children. Right? They're no longer going to be prescribing puberty blockers to the vast majority of them. They're going to be focusing much more on psychiatric care and much less on gender affirming care. They're going to be focusing much more on whether or not this person has been conditioned to think that they're this way when they're not. There's like, we need to like be okay with accepting, like I said earlier, that there is some element of social contagion. Because when it comes up and it's really clear that it does exist, I think to any like rational person, it's pretty clear that there is some kind of element here of that, not just in trans people, but in all LGBT stuff. Right? I think if you're introducing a new way of expressing your gender, your sexuality into a society, and you're presenting this to children when they're in the formative stages of their life, that some of those children are going to try it out, and some of them that might not have ended up as gay or lesbian or whatever might end up that way because people aren't born a specific way. I think there is some socialization that happens, right? And when they're like kind of figuring out their sexuality. So
and is grooming the right?
We can't
word?
Run away.
Is it?
No, I don't think it's the right word. I don't. Grooming implies that it's like malicious.
It's the wrong word.
Yeah, grooming implies that there's like some malicious intent to make these kids like gay or something. That's not what's happening. Just say we're introducing a new concept of gender and sexuality into the society, and because of that, children are adopting it. And this way, you can look over time and look back to the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s and see that the amount of people identifying as LGBT in our society is ballooned every fucking year. Right, every decade, every time they do this study, this poll, it jumps up like another like 50% or some shit, right? So
there's several reasons for this, right?
Yeah,
there are several reasons for this. Okay, so one of those reasons is as you make things, as society becomes more tolerant of certain lifestyles, more people are going to be willing to admit and self-report about those
Yeah, of
lifestyles.
course.
It's just going to happen. That's at play there. There is also an element of exploration that people do, obviously, right? Like when they're children, and the more permissible society is with their exploration, the more people are going to find out, hey, they really like this, and that's okay too. The problem here is that we've become.
Whoa. Sorry.
Oh, the problem here is that it is the demonization of this phenomenon, right? Like the demonization of it, rather than simply addressing it, right, and saying this is a thing that's happening. Let's find out why. It has now become, as Erudite has mentioned, political, radioactive, politically to even discuss. And this is a phenomenon that extends past the groomer issue, past the LGBT issue. There is this phenomenon that in order to be allies or to appear and to signal as your allyship to different groups, to different marginalized groups, white people especially are very willing to defend literally anything that they think will support a marginalized group's cause. And this has had very bad consequences for political discourse. Something
So if
you
I
should
can
simply oppose.
Okay. All right, I want to give it to Godless Granny. Were you trying to get in, or?
I was just going to say that most sociologists agree that the percentage of the population that is gay has been pretty much the same for the last couple thousand years. And what has changed with the LGBT movement is people who are willing to come out and express that they are gay. When I was young, that was something you did not do. And now it's acceptable. And it's not that that there's more people who are gay now because they've been exposed to this idea. It's just that there's more people who are willing to admit that they're gay.
So the issue, this is really multifaceted, right? And so the sociologists are right. And the question is going to be to what extent. And so it's really interesting because I'm actually almost dominantly on Soy and Godless Granny's side in this position, right? I would mostly argue be against Sprout and whatnot, and Dooby specifically. But it's interesting that I said because of how divisive this is, we can't even talk about, for example, the fact that like young girls do experience social contagion, and therefore we might be giving the wrong treatment. For example, if somebody feels like they are trans and it turns out that's not what's going on, they're just distressed, we might give them the wrong treatment. So this isn't to say trans doesn't exist or anything like that. It obviously does. It really matters. And I want to make sure that we get the care to them. But the issue is that as like practitioners can't even really talk about this phenomenon because it's so polarized that if they even put up a hesitation, they're like, you guys react to me like I'm in like the camp wanting to call people groomers, where it's like, no, like that shit's not going on. I only think grooming is going on when there's sexual abuse and like grooming going on. Like education is fine. I have no issue with education.
Do you have an example of a practitioner who is other than yourself, let's presume, who is facing such stiff resistance to their research?
So I'm not identifying myself because I'm not a medical doctor or a psychologist. So I'm not pretending that it is me, right? What I'm talking about, for example, is when it comes to getting funding specifically, there's a lot of hesitancy in academia. So part of this is I don't have an example because most academics are decently timid and they're just not going to move into this space if there's going to be a radical pushback. Again, this isn't even to say that this is necessarily the fact. The issue is we can't even research it one way or the other because it's like we can't get good data on trans individuals at all because it's so damn politically divisive. Like we just can't even talk about it, which is insane when like I want to talk about it because I want to help these individuals and I care a lot about them.
Well, I would invite you to check out Alice Drager and her work on detransitioning. Of course, she has been called some awful things, but I think that her work is well respected. I've been a fan of Alice Drager's since she wrote Galileo's Middle Finger. So there is an individual who I have in mind who has received some mild pushback for her research on detransitioning, but I don't think it's so cut and dry to say that this is a entirely entirely suppressive phenomena where she can't do her work or she's completely canceled because of this.
So I'm not making it sound like it's cut and dry, right? Like in any way. For example, I had a debate a couple of weeks ago, actually months ago now. Do you know Jangles? Science lad. He's talked a lot about trans athletes. So Jangles and I had a really, really great discussion. And in the discussion, him and I both agreed that there's a paucity of literature on transgender athletes specifically, because almost all of the literature and all of the science and data on it is so motivated on both sides. So you have some articles that are basically just trying to dismiss trans identity and dismiss everything and like paint out trans athletes to be like these Machiavellian people who are trying to like ruin women's sports. That's not the best data. But the issue is on the other side, they're just trying to be like, of course there's no difference. And they come in again. And so you have motivated thinking going on in the science on both sides, which makes these issues really, really difficult to tease apart. And using words like grooming, or also saying you're implying that people are grooming, it makes like the fact that literally there's so much pushback to me when I'm saying, of course trans people are real, of course all these things, but we need to have better data and we need to have better research, and it's hard to do it, is strange.
Of course, not sort of course, it's real, right? Like I don't think me nor Dooby are saying it's fake. Godless Granny, I would be interested in seeing the source that you made the claim on, that there's been the same amount of gay people throughout all basically time. According to NBC News, more than 1 in 5, or 21% of Generation Z adults, identify as LGBTQ. That's double the proportion of millennials, nearly 5 times the proportion of Generation X, and compared to 0.8% of traditionalists who are 77 or older. So I would argue. Go ahead.
Well, just to back up your point really quickly. So I put a study in Stardust server earlier. I'll put it in the group chat for you guys. But when I was nerding out about this stuff, right, I stumbled upon this, right? So I wanted to see if there was actually like some social contagion, some evidence of it. And there is pretty strong evidence that when children are raised in LGBT households, daughters especially, daughters raised with lesbian parents especially, they are far more likely to end up LGBT themselves, up to like 57%. And on the high end of the general population of Gen Z, it's like 15%. So if somebody comes to you and you say, hey, yeah, over half of girls raised by lesbians just happen to have be lesbians, and they would have been that way no matter what, that seems really unlikely. It seems that, hey, if you're raising a child in a place where there is they are being exposed to different ways of expressing gender, sexuality, or whatever, they might try those things on, because our understanding of sexuality and gender is something that is massively influenced by our society, right? These like social constructs typically, right? So like I don't know why we'd run away from the idea that there could be some social influence on how our children are experimenting or expressing these things.
And what we have to figure out is that a problem? Because it's like, A, that might be happening.
Yeah.
And then B, is that even an issue, right? I don't care if somebody's a lesbian.
Yeah, and to be super clear.
Cares? I don't care if somebody's trans.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is, unless it's a trans thing, right? The trans thing comes with a ton of baggage. But the gay and lesbian and bi, like, I don't think that's a problem.
Would you expect this to happen in 1948 or 1953? Would you expect the numbers to be different back then as opposed to 2020?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. So the Kinsey Institute published studies in 1948 and 1953 that found 37% of males and 13% of females had at least some overt homosexual experience to orgasm. So that's a big, like 30.
Have to link me that. That sounds.
It is. You can Google the Kinsey Institute and like diversity of sexual experience. It is a big number.
Yeah, but it's also like the Kinsey Institute is coming. Like those 1950 studies are like under a lot of scientific fire right now. Like a lot.
Okay.
It's still being worked out, but like because I read those reports, I'm very careful about the amount of salt I give them, because there's a lot of questions about the methodology and about Kinsey himself as being like there's some sus stuff going
Yeah,
on.
So
that
what's
sounds
the
like
right
on the level
number?
of
I may
John,
have misheard.
John
I may have
Money
misheard.
trying to give like
No,
toddlers
I know.
orgasms. Like, it
That's
sounds
the
pretty
point. That's the
sus.
point, right? Absolutely, the sociologist is right. Historically, of course, these groups were oppressed. Of course, if you were trans, you were way less likely to come out. So
Yeah.
as we normalize as a society, we should see those numbers come up. Just like as we get better at diagnosis of autism, we should see the numbers trend up for a while. The issue is, at some point, we should expect that to basically kind of plateau out. At what point should it plateau? And if it's continuing to go beyond, is there something else going on? Are we widening our definition of these too much? Is there social contagion going on? Are we misdiagnosing? Like, there's a whole bunch of things we have to talk about.
That's the point I was just about to make, is that a big part of the reason we see the increase in the LGBTQ community is because we've been widening the definition. Bisexual people are not gay. And the point I made was that the segment of the population that is gay has remained the same. Well, yes, there's more LGBTQ because now we've got the bisexual people in there. I identify as asexual. And some people put me under the umbrella as well. And that's a big part of the reason why the whole community is increasing, is we're bringing a lot more people under the umbrella.
So I don't think so. The study that even the study that Soyal is bringing up, I don't think it says what it's even being meant to say. So basically,
I read it verbatim.
I understand. Okay, I understand that, but I think it's being at least misinterpreted. So basically what the very least is what it's saying is there was sexual curiosity between the people. 1979 study with Gebhardt and Johnson re-examined the amount of homosexual experience in Kinsey's basic sample of non-institutionalized males and females. They found that 9.9% of the males in the college sample had extensive homosexual experience, and 3.7% of females had extensive homosexual experience,
Right.
which is far and beyond away from 37% and 13%.
No, and you're miscomparing, because it's 37% had some overt homosexual experience, and then the next line down it says 10% of males were more or less exclusively homosexual, and I find that is a fair reproduction there in the 1979 study.
Okay,
So
but the
can I ask you-
1979 study says extensive. It's not exclusive, it's extensive.
Right. Okay. Right. So you had one heterosexual experience. Great.
Let's give it to Wick. Yeah, let's give it to Wick.
Sure. I just to kind of get your opinion on this, right, and see kind of where you lie here. Do you think that there is any chance, right, that some identify, right, some young people identify or say they identify as a sexuality, maybe bisexual, maybe a non-binary, in order to be socially accepted? Do you think that's a possibility at all?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any guess on how much, in just, wild guess, 10%, 20%, 30%?
I don't care. No one's getting hurt.
Fair enough. You don't care. No one's getting hurt. Okay. Fair enough. I was just curious. Thank you.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like, transitioning and being trans is very, there's a lot that's loaded with that, right? Major life changes. And the issue is, if somebody identifies as trans and it's not the cause of their distress, they might make significant major life overhauls and still not actually address the distress, right? If the distress is actually coming from an anxiety disorder, for example, and they misidentify as being trans, for example, they might make major life changes and their distress remains the same. So it's not that, like, well, because they become trans, there's an inherent harm. Unless, like, to be honest, like, if somebody becomes trans and they go through like a major transition, but like that's the extreme niche cases, right? Let's just talk about like more like reasonable stuff, like they've been on like puberty blockers for a while, right? All that's happened though, like, what's the harm? Well, the harm is that we've like misdiagnosed this individual for several years, and they've been in constant high levels of distress with an incorrect like solution to their problems, right?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, in fact, we had an AMA with Tulip R or like Richie on my server last weekend, right? And he, born male, was went through the whole process to transition to a woman, got the surgery, everything, and is now suing the government in the UK because he got through all the safeguards. It felt like he was being encouraged the entire way, like the transgender was being affirmed the entire every step of the process, and he actually he's not trans. right? But now his life is forever changed, and he has daily pain because of this thing, because people were too accepting, or not willing enough to push back, I think, right? And that's one of the major changes with the Swedish Health Board, is they're going to do far less of the gender affirming stuff, right? Which is, I think, the standard of care in the United States right now. That they are going to prioritize like psychiatric help for these people before, affirming the gender and then getting them on a path to being comfortable with that gender.
I know it's not easy to get irreversible gender affirming care in the US. You actually have to go through a lot.
Oh, that was the UK that I was talking about. I'm not saying that Rich was in the US.
And maybe the UK nanny state effed up. I'm willing to accept that. I sort of believe in more personal autonomy, but as well that invites more personal responsibility. So if you think you're trans and you go through irreversible changes, it is valid to say that, well, anyone who is really, really pushing you in that direction, like if you join a cult or something, or a weird religious institution, and they really push you in some direction, maybe there's a little bit of culpability, but the personal responsibility also factors in.
I think it's an issue.
Be able to sue medical providers, right? Should someone be able to sue medical providers that they claim push them into transitioning when they find out that, oh, nope, I fucked up, I'm not really trans, right? As rare as that may happen, right? Should people be able to sue the hospital or the medical professionals involved?
Yeah, we got malpractice insurance for a reason, don't we?
Okay. But doesn't that put the medical professionals themselves in a really fucked up situation? Right? Because
no,
on one hand, you have normal. You have a child that might be trans, that might be going through this thing, and we know that if you are trans, the earlier you transition, the better chance you're gonna have of passing and living a happy lifestyle in the new gender, whatever. So if they make a mistake on the other end, and you are trans, but they deny you this, like the puberty blockers or the HRT or whatever, until you're 18 years old, and by that point you've gone through puberty, and there are changes to your body that you just can't undo. And we know that leads to these people having a very high suicide rate, right? Like, why wouldn't you also blame the doctor on that?
Yeah, I absolutely would. And iatrogenic death is iatrogenic medicine, which is malpractice medicine or accidental, like leaving a sponge or a scalpel or something in the body. That was the number one cause of death up until this decade, I believe. It's one of my favorite stats. Like 800,000 people per year died from medicine gone wrong. So yes, absolutely, there's responsibility there, but it doesn't mean that we get to soy out about the word grooming.
For sure. And I would hope that you're at least hearing me. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think a lot of us are agreeing. The grooming word is inappropriate, it's malicious, and it is unironically trying to paint a lot of the LGBT movement and just education about LGBT as this like sinister Machiavellian conspiracy to like convert your kids, make them gay and make them the opposite gender. And that's not fucking happening necessarily, right? And if it is, we would want evidence that that's happening. I mean, if there was a massive grooming conspiracy, I think we'd all be like, oh, that's a problem. If there's a whole bunch of
educators. It's called the Catholic Church. Sorry.
Well, I mean, to be honest, if we go into the Catholic Church stats, you could argue that all public education grooms worse than the Catholic Church.
But it's okay. So it seems to be okay to say that too. Like, so it's okay to go after the Catholic Church and call them groomers as a whole. When
understand, Spartacus? When we do it, it's good because they're bad.
No, it's legally established.
When we do it, it's authorized.
It's legally established. Yeah.
What's the Catholic Church is legally established that the entire Catholic Church is groomers. It's legally established.
It's legally established that the church enabled grooming because they had clergy who had committed offenses and then were moved without telling the new parish that they moved to. And this is where there's liability and churches like losing their property or having to shelter their property in parishioner funds and stuff. It is really cringe. I don't know if you remember the 90s, but this was a big deal.
Wait,
I'm
okay,
not
but
backing
then
up-
I think-
I'm not backing up. I'm not backing up.
I'm
the
so
Catholic
sorry, guys.
Church.
I'm so sorry. I think we got to move on to the next topic. But before we move on to the next topic, I'm going to read a couple of chats here. Little Bits says, "Whoa, nice one."
Thanks,
And
Little
then
Bits.
Franklin and Slash says, "Would you agree that because LGBTQ plus is a large banner, there may be more people identifying who are bi or queer / questioning, which skews the numbers?" I think that was the point that Godless Granny made. Actually, it was a decent point.
I think most of us agreed to that as
Yeah.
well. Like this, that
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
self-evident. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 2. Is it better for a child to learn about sex from missionary heterosexual porn or from hyper-conservative, only in the dark for procreation parents?
I can start if you like.
Yes, let's go around with this one.
Neither.
Okay.
Neither are very good sex education. To be honest,
like
unironically,
cheating.
probably the missionary porn is still going to be better because holy shit, the sexual oppression of like this is coming from somebody who like grew up fundy. I don't like hate the church. I'm not an anti-theist. Many people know that I have some level of faith, but holy fuck, is the sex ed bad in almost all religious circles? I would argue instead there's this great lady in Canada. Her name is Salima Noon, and she started this whole sex education program in Canada, at least, and it's really, really popular in BC right now. That is amazing sex education. It's always extremely age appropriate. It talks like when we're talking about younger kids, it's almost exclusively focused on how to teach kids to tell their parents when somebody's touching them inappropriately and the way for them to like identify that and verbalize that so parents understand what's going on, which is amazing. We want more of that. And so in general, I would say neither of those things are great options. I would prefer like actual like qualified, trained sex educational professionals, which a lot of people think that there are crap. There is a lot of crap in the education system. I'm the first to tell you that I hate the public education system, but Selena Noom and her company are doing an amazing job with sex education.
So if you had to choose one, though, so if you had to choose
the
one,
first one, yeah, the first one.
the first, okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna agree with Not So Erudite here. It's first. I would start off by saying it's neither. If I had to choose one, I would say missionary heterosexual porn. But I'm gonna go on the. I'm typically gonna go on the neither side. Is that porn has been shown to be very harmful to learning how to have sex. It's been extremely harmful to that idea. To the mentality of people. Porn, there's been a lot of studies done about it, and it has not had a good effect on society as a whole. Whereas I think it'd be more dangerous to have the opposite happen, to where it is to the point to a hyper conservative, only in the dark for procreation idea. And that is outside the bounds, usually even in Christianity, that's outside the bounds. Usually the Christianity that at least I'm involved with would say that God created sex, and God created sex so that way we could enjoy it. And it's not like only in the dark for procreation. That's like a very, very small portion of Christianity. But I would overall say that missionary heterosexual porn would be better than that.
Okay, you cowards, right? Okay, you cowards not picking a side. What is this shit? We're on Stardust stream. This isn't the coward stream, right? I'm going to pick a side. I'm going to pick the hyper-conservative, only in the dark for procreation side. Why would I pick that side, right? Because we want diversity in education. And for those of you who are basically excluding anything outside of heterosexuality, shame on you. Right? Like, look, it's been proven that these hyper-conservative parents often have a wide and diverse porn habits, okay? Wide and diverse, right? And so, look, they love their kids, right? They want to reach out to their kids. They want to train their kids. And so if they have any chance, and given the binary we have been forced upon us by Stardust, right? Given that binary, I want the one with more chance of diversity in education, and shame on you for saying otherwise. That's all I got to say.
Wow.
I have a bit of a funny story here because I actually had an excellent sex education in the school. And I grew up and I went to high school in the 70s in Wisconsin, back when Wisconsin was considered one of the more liberal states in the country. But the sex education that we were offered really only told us, was what we were given in 6th and 7th grade about the changes that girls and boys are going through with their bodies. And it ended there. But we had a speech class, and one of my fellow students invited her brother, who was newly graduated from medical school, to talk about sexuality. And it was excellent. It was absolutely excellent. And of course, she got a very good grade on the speech. And then I turned around and did the most dumb thing possible, which is I converted to Christianity and I sent my kids to conservative Christian schools where they were taught abstinence only. And my youngest told me about being in high school and as a senior in high school being told by one of his teachers, "You are so lucky to get an abstinence-only education," to which he found that absolutely hilarious. And I then gave my kids a supplemental education on sexuality.
Oh, I have a similar experience growing up in the South. Of course, my parents and the whole freaking church were so embarrassed that the kids were going to go through sex education. They basically put us in front of the most plain vanilla, your bodies fit together in special places, and they asked us to ask each other and answer each other's questions, which was like, I was in the oldest group of kids, and I was like, okay, Carl, you answer. It's not my fault if you say something weird. Super, super odd. But yeah, so this binomial choice, I'm going to go hard. I'm going to play it Wick mode and go hard the opposite direction. We need state-sponsored, plain vanilla missionary sex education so that, you know, everyone is checking in on on their partner and making sure they have enthusiastic consent and really illustrating what a caring, loving relationship is. And so this, I think, as both Sprouticus and Not So Erudite said, would be less harmful than an abstinence education. And I think that, in fact, if we communicate more of these things like consent and checking in with your partner, we would have a lot more people conscious of their own bodies and conscious of a fulfilling relationship. Hit me, yes, Dooby. Come on, let's go. I think you're muted.
No, I was absorbing. I think it's really interesting that, like, I'm on a panel where we just went over like why it's bad to be like a groomer or call people groomers. And then in the next topic, all of you, just about all of you, say that we should show children porn. This is little sus, kind of a weird place to take the panel. But okay.
So sorry. It's my fault.
It's okay. Look, you know, maybe this is why, you know, you guys are called groomers. Okay, I'm sorry. I think of the two options, right? Showing kids porn and what is it? Hyper-conservative, only in the dark procreation parents, or for procreation parents. I'd go with the hyper-conservative parents, to be honest. Not because I think maybe they would get a better sexual education, because porn typically, like, they're not using condoms, they're coming on the girl's face, they are slapping her around a lot of times. They're not doing do you consent to me touching your boobie thing, right? It's
the
very
question states missionary only.
Okay, maybe Spraticus, maybe you're not like very imaginative, right? But that can include tons of things, right? You can shove your fingers down some girl's throat while you're a missionary, and it's totally fine, right?
Ooh, so that's traditional missionary.
Okay, so I think porn reinforces a ton of like really, really negative patriarchal understandings of what it is to be like a man and a woman in a sexual situation. I think the industry as it is right now is really fucked and disgusting, and I can't support it in any way. And I don't think anybody should be consuming porn at all. And the idea of like showing that to children is like that'd be extremely damaging, I think. So if those are the only two options, I'd go with the parents that encourage them not to have sex until they're married. Given that we know that, you know, in marriages where they have fewer sexual partners before the marriage, they end up with better outcomes, right? People end up happier, healthier, longer lasting marriages if they haven't had a ton of sexual partners before. Yeah, so I'd absolutely go with that instead.
Okay,
what's the one thing that...
Real quick. I have a question for you. You can talk
all right.
exactly
let's
after
go,
this, right?
Okay, so let's go to Wick, and then we'll go to Soyaddle, okay?
Yeah, Soyaddle, you mentioned enthusiastic consent, right? And like we use words, we don't know what they mean. Can you give us a good example here on this panel for all the audience of what your enthusiastic yes would be? Like, can you give us the most enthusiastic yes you possibly can? We want to hear it.
I just want to, before we answer that question, I'm so sorry, but Steffi in the chat brings up a really good point. She says, Stardust didn't specify if the porn is about people who are related or not. So I'm so sorry. There's so many. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize there are so many things that I left out of this this scenario. Anyway, sorry. Continue with your question, Wick.
Again,
Wick,
I just want to hear an example of your most enthusiastic yes, please. For the crowd.
Wick, without breaking TOS, I want this to be you.
Yes, I love it, but it's not enthusiastic enough. We need more panade. I want
okay.
pizzazz. I want dazzle me. Come on.
Razzle you, dazzle you. Yes.
He wants an
I want
Aggie
to.
face.
I want to. Well, that's co-opting, so I'm not going to do that on stream. But in the bedroom, no one can cancel you. So let's go cancel each other in the bedroom, please.
Okay, that's all I wanted to do. It's just me.
How many subs would it take to you to make you do the Ahigao face?
I don't accept monetization on my channel because of Twitch's TOS. So, hey.
All right. Who else wants to take me up on this? Sprouticus?
How
many subs for Sprout to do the Ahigao?
I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what that face is.
Yeah, I don't know what that face is.
Okay, so I can totally do for you, not so
I'll tell you.
I'll do for like $25. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
From your
undercut it.
chat
I'll
or
do it
from
for
me
20.
directly? You want me to PayPal you?
You can just super chat it or PayPal or whatever. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do my best rendition of it. So.
Okay. Let's see.
Okay. Let me look in the camera real quick. Okay.
With the Zoom, use the Zoom.
Use the Zoom. Okay. All right.
Oh yes.
Okay. I think you have to look like you have to do this, right? And you have to go.
And cross
Right?
your eyes more. You have to cross your eyes more.
Yeah.
And then you have to have a little yeah, look at the camera. Cross your eyes. And then get a little bit of drool coming off your tongue.
I don't know if I can produce the drool, but please don't clip this. Chat, please don't screenshot this, okay?
It's been clipped a million times already for sure.
All right.
Amazing. All right. I'll give
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, chat.
Clipping
I'm
that
so
as we
sorry.
speak. Just so
Satisfied.
we're aware.
Look,
Profile pic.
it's not a profile picture. It is. I did that because for the monetary incentive. That is as far as I will go, chat. Okay, don't get any ideas. All right, let's get back to the topic. So,
I'll go ahead and
Just
agree
showing
with
children
Dooby
pornography,
hard
right?
on one thing. Porn is absolutely kabuki sex. It is not realistic. It is not, enlightening or uplifting. And that's sort of the difference that I think we could embrace in Stardust's binary challenge is find a way to make this missionary, plain vanilla heterosexual sex correct and instructive. And that's the right answer to the challenge, I feel, because abstinence only is harmful and cringe and leads to greater teen pregnancies and earlier sex partners rather than delaying the onset of sexual activity, which I think that comprehensive sex education does a good job at delaying onset of penetrative sex.
okay. So I just want to contribute real quick. I totally agree with you, Soyadal, because I remember sex education in school, and they had the diagrams on the video, and in the video they showed the man's penis going inside the vagina, and I can't tell you, that scarred me for life. There was nothing that looked scarier to me than seeing this huge thing going inside what I imagined, because at that time I was like 10 or 11, and I imagined like, oh my God, how's that huge thing going to fit in there? So that was terrifying for me. So, I think that adequately scared me away from sexual interaction for a very long time. So,
Look,
yeah.
if we want,
the idea that the procreation, like in the dark theory though, is actually going to work out for the benefit of society, just isn't there. John Santelli, professor at Mailman School, the weight of scientific evidence shows these programs do not help young people delay inhibition of sexual intercourse. While abstinence is theoretically effective, in actual practice, intentions to abstain from sexual activity often fail, and that leads to more STDs and more unwanted pregnancies. And so this is going to fail. The idea and the question even being phrased is that is it better for a child to learn about sex from missionary heterosexual porn or from hyper-conservative only in the dark for procreation parents? And I would almost argue that you could include that you're getting sex ed on top of missionary heterosexual porn, because whoever's showing you that is obviously going to be able to give more context, etc., and so on. Whereas the parents are not actually going to be able to. They're both evils, but the less damaging evil would definitely be
No. I am 100% on the side of not. Look, hey, I want to be clear. I'm 100% on the side of not showing children porn. Boom. That's it. Whether the other side is bad, yeah, sure, it's bad. But given those two choices, yeah,
it's weird. It's like
I'm
you
on the
guys
side
hate
of not showing children porn.
You guys hate Christian parents so much. You'd rather have some pedophiles sit down and show kids porn. Like, what's going on?
Okay, well, we didn't say pedophiles. That wasn't part of the prompt.
Who's going to be showing kids this porn? Is it the teachers?
It could just be the kids stumble upon it themselves.
If the teachers are showing children porn in the classroom, do I get to call them?
None of that was in the prompt. You just added.
Are you making children vulnerable?
The teacher, wait a minute. The teacher
said. Okay, so
Sprout said, which is more efficacious education for them learning from missionary heterosexual porn or from hyper-conservative parents?
So Sprout said that the person showing them this porn might be able to give them some context and sex education on top of it. Right, so that implies to me that there is an adult there showing this child porn. Like I don't know how else I'm going to take that.
But even underneath this case, when you are extremely sheltered, there's been studies about this too. When you are extremely sheltered, you are more likely to break out of that shelter and do whatever the fuck you want because you just don't know.
Not true.
You've been told that everything's bad, and so when you finally aren't sheltered anymore, you do things that are like such risky behaviors that would have been taught to you not to do prior if you were not sheltered. Sheltering has not been shown to be a good way of parenting children via studies. This is sheltering. Whether you want to argue or not, the second option is the hyper-conservative
why is being taught that you should wait until marriage and wait till you're going to have kids have sex? Why is that like hyper-sheltering?
That's not
wait till marriage.
It's inefficient.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to ask if you're showing the children the diagram that I saw, which was a video, and it showed the man's diagram of the man, and then his pee-pee goes in the vagina, and is that porn? What do you consider porn, Dooby? Do you think my teachers were groomers?
No,
Dooby?
If it's a diagram, no, I wouldn't consider.
It was animated. It was animated, Dooby.
Education, right? So other than like the porn I saw when I was like 5 years old. The sex education that I got in, 5? My parents left me home alone a lot, and like they had a Playboy subscription for a bit. They left me home alone. I woke up. I was like 5 years old, and I turned on the TV, and I remember very specifically what was happening. Maybe this scarred me because I remember like details. Okay, it was softcore porn, 2 white guys in the jungle with a black woman. And I watched that for a bit. They were kind of like air humping her. They weren't like showing it going or anything. They're just showing showing her boobs in the moaning or whatever. And then I flipped the channel and there's like topless Japanese like soccer for some reason. So I watched that for a while. And yeah, that was like my introduction to boobies and sex. Okay.
I finally get you, man. I finally get you. Yeah, I get it.
So isn't the issue in your story that there wasn't an adult to like walk you along and like explain this in a more appropriate way?
Yeah. So the appropriate way to learn about this, I think, was in 5th grade when they started getting into like sex and pregnancy and childbirth and all kinds of stuff. And they made us watch this movie that was also pretty gross. I remember like a woman like giving birth and like all this shit and stuff came out of her, and they like showed it up close, and they had like little boys talking about getting hard at the pool and how it was awkward, and like that was like kind of awkward, but I feel like it's way more appropriate than watching 2 people like have sex, like for real, you know.
I have a video title, and you can find this on YouTube. You do have to click through the age and explicit material. Like, I understand, really want to see this, but it is MRI sex. So it is an actual couple having missionary sex, but it's an MRI. So it's like this weird Machiavellian weird like Cthulhu style combination of what scarred Stardust and actual porn. And so I think this is it. This is like scientifically accurate, cannot be debunked. This is really what it's like, and yeah, it will dissuade people from having sex.
Horrifying. That
It
sounds
might
like
be
cosmic
good
horror.
though. Well, wait a minute. It might be good. Maybe the key is to showing children the diagrams, but make it look as horrifying as possible, right? So then they're like, then even if they are interested in a boy or a girl and they're really in the mood and stuff, and you
That
know,
would not be
teenage
good.
hormones going through them, they still think about that and they're like, oh God, never
That
doing
would
that.
not be good. I don't know why
I'm
you're
pretty
saying
sure
that
there
would
would
be
be
good.
way
That would
less
not be
teenage
good.
pregnancies.
Why would you
There
want?
would be way
why
less
would you
teenage
wanna-
pregnancies.
But
There
for
might
society
be,
in the long run, that would not be
unintended
good. You are
consequences
literally
from that, though.
scarring people from wanting to have sex with their partners in future relationships from ever wanting to have sex. So that would not
I'm
be
just
good for
joking.
society as a whole.
Yeah.
Look,
I'm
there's
just joking.
7 billion people on Earth. I mean, we
The
could
idea
stand to.
isn't to turn the idea
Stardust,
isn't
are
to
you
turn
still-
Lovecraft into erotica. Okay, that's not the idea here. That's not what we want. Okay, look, it's already sus enough with all the tentacles and shit. Like, we don't need them being like equating cosmic horror and horrifying unreality to procreation. Just let's dodge that bullet.
What were you saying, Godless Green?
Stardust, when did you overcome the feelings that you had gotten from those diagrams in school? At what age?
I think by the time I was like, I think by the time I was 18 or 19, I knew that it wasn't going to be like painful, but it was still something that was, not that painful. My friends would still tell me, "Oh, it's painful the first time," so I would be scared. But yeah, I think by then I knew it wasn't like this horrifying, like you're sticking an entire human being inside you, you know, like that's kind of like what I was in, because they include that, you know, in sex education, where the woman gets pregnant and a whole human being comes out of you. And that also probably added to the horror of it. So yeah. But by the time I was like 18 or 19, I think I was like, okay, it's not like a huge human, you know, coming out of you at least, but somebody told me it was still going to be painful. So I was very, anxious about that. So yeah. So.
Okay.
And scene.
So to be clear, you guys do not want to show kids porn. That's what you're saying.
Not
Yeah,
actually.
I would prefer.
No.
So
I
I'm saying
appreciate
I'm saying that's the like
You could die on
better
this
off
hill.
evil, but I'm not
You
saying.
could just
I'm
say
saying-
no. I don't want to see kids porn.
That just
You
wasn't
could just say
hypothetical.
that.
That's
I'm saying it's the better off evil
No,
in the
Sprout,
hypothetical.
that was just
but
not the
it-
hypothetical.
okay,
Stop
can I-
giving him that. Stop giving him that. It just wasn't the hypothetical.
No, give it.
The
Keep going, Sprout. Give it to
No,
me.
Sprout, you're giving Dooby the win. All right, the
Hand it over.
hypothetical.
But what-
the
but
hypothetical.
essentially-
Stop,
essentially-
Let it go,
stop,
Sprout. Let me
the
have it.
Essentially, what I'm saying is no. In real life, no. I would not support that. In real life, no.
The hypothetical was, where should kids learn their sex education? What's the preference? Just
Right.
in general porn, or extremely intense fundy parents? Doesn't mean you're
Hey, that's always
showing
ruining
children
my
the
fun.
porn. I know.
General, I mean,
I know,
I
Dooby.
mean,
I still love you.
their
I still
phone,
I'm onto you.
so
I'm onto you.
their phone would be showing them porn. I don't think that really matters in the grand scheme of things if they're getting a greater
Can I
sex
ask-
education.
Sprout, when
And
was the
there's-
first time you saw porn? And were
Holy
your parents
shit.
involved?
No, my parents were not involved the first
Okay,
time.
so
I,
what
It's a
was the
really
first
fucked up
time?
story.
you have to realize I was sheltered. I was taught abstinence only.
That's fine. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Wait, did you go
Serious
around
question.
like? Did you go
I
around
probably
like
the
blowing
first
up
time I
pussy?
probably
like,
the first
when
time
you
I
got out of
probably
the
watched.
shelter?
Oh my god.
Holy
dude.
fuck.
Sprout, would
shit.
you show the
The first
children the
time I-
porn?
I'm curious.
Okay, guys, let's just
No.
let Sprouticus
Oh my
finish what he's
God.
saying. let's let Sprouticus finish what he's saying, and then people can come in with the horrible questions, okay?
So the first time I watched porn was I would probably say 16 or 17 years old. Is the first time I watched porn. I grew up in the hyper conservative idea that abstinence only, etc. and so on. But no, in real life, no, I would not say that. I would not be like, yeah, show the kids porn. That's the best way to go about things. Just given the question, that's the least harmful option. In my opinion, that's the least harmful option.
So again, I'm not trying to shame you here for this. I'm just curious, right? Because like I guess my point here is that kids, unfortunately, in the day and age we live, are very likely to see porn at younger and younger ages. So I think having the parents kind of supersede that and step in and teach them before they discover it on their own, infinitely preferable, right? Infinitely preferable. Even if the parents aren't very good.
Teach them to never have
right?
sex, and even when they do, to never have sex besides procreation, even when they do,
rather
make sure the
than
lights
them
are
just
lights are
finding
off,
it themselves,
make sure
right?
you can't see
and
anything.
stumbling upon it, right? And like, look, I don't know if you've seen some of the categories, right, on these sites, but they can be kind of horrific.
The simple idea that if you demonize something that much, that kids aren't going to look it up because of how
You don't have to
demonized
demonize it.
Then, that's what's going to happen. I don't think you know about hyper-conservative
Did you look
ideals.
No, I was
up
raised
bestiality porn?
religious. I
Was
know
you
about
filed porn because it was
hyper-conservative.
demonized?
I'm sorry,
I'm
what'd you
sorry?
say, Dooby?
Well, this idea that, hey, if you demonize a thing, kids are gonna be like interested in it. I guess that's true to an extent, right? But I'm assuming that, Sprout, you didn't go around looking at like dog fucking woman porn because it was demonized and you were told it was a bad thing. Yeah, okay. And I'm assuming too that,
But
that
I
because,
did do a lot of
given that you were
stupid
sheltered,
shit after.
given
oh
that you
my
were
gosh.
sheltered, right? So when you got out of the shelter, you didn't go around just fucking random women without
This
a
is
condom.
such a fucking straw
24/7,
man.
right?
This is such a
Yeah,
straw man.
so you
brought
got out
up
of the
one
shelter and
example.
you didn't do the
brought
bad
up what
thing.
you brought up one example, and then you're like, "Oh, because you didn't do
I'm
this,
just
then
curious.
your whole entire point is wrong." No,
I just want to know if you're
when
better
you
than
are-
Go
the
ahead,
shelter.
not so
If I can
erudite.
answer the
Sure.
question.
Okay, let's let Sprouticus answer and then not so erudite, okay?
So
What's your body
the
count?
simple
Doobie.
one. I've
That's
only had sex with my wife. I'm so thrown off right now. The idea that you bring up this one example, since you didn't ever do that, your whole point about kids being sheltered is incorrect. Is a straw man of a straw man. This point is that when you are sheltered, when you get that freedom, when you go outside your house and your parents aren't with you, you're going to make extremely dumb choices because you've been told not to do this your entire life. You've been told no, you must never do this, and you've been so restricted that when those chains finally come off, you're gonna make stupid fucking decisions when you decide to go out there and no one's there to tell you can't do it anymore.
I love you.
So, Sprout, since you refused my trying to bail you out from Dooby being mean to you, I have a trolley car question for you instead. So, there's 2 tracks, right? And if you pull the lever, you have to show the children the porn. But if you don't pull the lever, a stranger that you don't know is showing children the porn. Are you going to pull the lever?
Gosh.
Not like an agent of the state or a trusted school teacher, just like a person off the street.
Just like some random hobo on the street.
I didn't say random. I said
It doesn't have to be a
random.
hobo. It could be some random guy you find at the park.
I
There's
can
a
narrow the
lottery.
sample population,
Some
I
random
suppose.
guy at the playground. I don't know where
It's
you're
like
going with
Twilight
it. If it's
Zone
some random guy
playground
at the
box.
playground, then yes, I'll choose me. If it's some random guy at the playground that sits there taking pictures of kids, yeah, I'll choose me.
You can
No, he's
add
not
that
taking
in.
pictures of. Okay.
I didn't say
You
that. I
said
just said
some
a
random
random
person.
person. And then you added, so a pedophile. And I'm like, no, just a random person or you. Are you pulling the lever?
Given that it has to be, given the background that it has to be that way, and there's no external option that someone has to do it, then I don't know. I think I'd pull the lever just so that way I know that it can be done correctly. That in a moral
What's the
manner.
correct way to do it?
In a moral manner.
What's the correct way to show children porn? Yeah.
What?
Given no other option, the idea would just to be added as sex education. So it add in like this is what happens, etc. and so on. And just through sex education, given no other option. Again, this is not like the preferred way to go forward. This is absolutely not the preferred way to go forward. But given no other option. There you go.
I'm dying. I gave you the story.
And then Seattle.
Yeah, so you have 3 options now. You do have 1 card to call a friend, and you also have 1 card to reduce the options. I'll just give those to you free, so you can redeem them at any time, Sprout. Continue, Soy.
Okay, I was going to say, I've been through this. The answer is you kind of like say, hey, kids, watch this and talk to each other about it. If you have any questions, I'll be in the hall.
That's horrible. That's the worst because then you've got the kids telling each other horrible misinformation.
Yeah,
like one kid is going to tell before sex education, it was like, oh yeah, the baby comes out of your pee hole. You know how
But it
horrifying
won't be your
that
fault.
is?
I mean that's the point of this lever. It's like, oh, not my fault.
Not so erudite. Is this a reference to the button box on the Twilight Zone?
No, but I was more like I was referencing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I was trying to think of all the options that they give.
Well, if you were doing the button box, that would mean that if you pulled the lever so that somebody else had to do it, then after they were done, the next person that pulls the lever would pull you in because the next person would be somebody you don't even know.
To be educating somebody else's children.
So
Maybe that's a good.
Sprout would be kidnapping other people's children and then showing them porn. Is what you're telling me.
So it's the worst of all worlds, I think. We nailed it, gang. We found the true wrong answer, and that's important.
Sprout.
Okay, I think it's a good time for us to move forward. Chat. Remember, you can super chat, and your questions will be read between topics. Admiral Love wanted to ask, what's everyone's opinion of homemade porn depicting healthy sex between committed partners? Would this still be harmful? Wait, homemade from their parents? I don't think. I don't.
Why not just do it in front of them at that point? Why even record it? That's super hard. I would prefer to watch porn not of my parents as a 5-year-old than to watch my own parents having sex. Holy shit!
I stumbled onto my parents I stumbled onto them having sex like 2 or 3 times when I was a kid, but we moved around a lot because they were always like losing their apartments and shit. But everyone we went to had really thin walls, so every night I'd hear them having sex. I know what my dad sounds like when he's coming. It's not a good time. I don't recommend it. Literally every fucking night. Like it was terrible.
At least they had a really healthy sex life. Wow.
Yeah.
Every night
Yeah,
as
that's
parents
really
of
good.
children. That's impressive.
Well, yeah, that's okay.
That's why there's so many dupesters
And
around.
they're still together.
Unfortunately.
So next topic. Unless anybody else wants to weigh in on this question.
Let's go.
Okay, and now, Sarah, I thank you for the super chat. So next topic
Are you gonna read it
is.
out?
Oh yes, it says "ooh-ah," heart emoji. Thank you.
Quite what it says. Okay.
Wait, what does it say? What did I do wrong?
I just wanted more emphasis in it, but that's okay. I already got that. Here you go.
Heart emoji. Okay, is that better?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Next topic. Has the role of religion in politics changed in recent years or decades? Considering trends and religious affiliation, might we expect it to change in the near future? Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Goblins. Brandon.
There is no question that we saw a huge shift in the role of religion in politics in the early 1980s. Reagan's campaign is where we got the whole abortion issue, because the abortion issue when Roe versus Wade was first decided, the Catholic Church was on board with, this is wrong, or that abortion is wrong. But for the most part, the Protestant Church completely ignored it. It wasn't until Ronald Reagan's campaign made this a campaign issue that this started becoming a huge divisive issue in our country. And ever since then, the religious right, it started with Jerry Falwell's moral majority, and getting the right wing into, not just the right wing, but Christian nationalists, the Christian right wing, into politics and trying to get their beliefs codified into law. So I think there's absolutely no question that in the last couple of decades we've seen a huge swing of Christianity interfering with politics.
I have the exact opposite take. So yes, we have seen all these things are true that you have mentioned, but the reason that we've increased they've increased in volume is because religion has been losing ground in politics for decades. Okay, they removed prayer from schools back in, I believe, the 60s, was it? Also, remember JFK, one of the huge issues against him was that he was Catholic, okay, and he would be beholden to the Pope. That was a big issue. Like, one of the reactions that a lot of the right has had is they've crawled into bed with Christians, right? And they've kind of made this alliance, if you will, to get a lot of political things done and a lot of political things passed. There are people whose sole issue is abortion, right? They would vote Democrat if not for abortion and how they do. But this has been waning in popularity. It's been waning in influence. It's been waning in power for decades, right? We can argue that there may be a recent uptick in the upsurge, but that I don't think is evidence enough to say that the role religion plays in politics today is anywhere comparable to what it did in the 1950s and 1960s. That's my thoughts.
I think I'm going to give you a C on your interpretation of the panic over JFK's Catholicism. This came from conservative religious figures, not like atheism was not a power movement.
That was the point. Did you not hear what I said? The whole point was that in the 60s, the conservative religious had a lot of play and a lot of power, and one of their issues was that they were against JFK because they thought it would be a papal kind of takeover, and would be beholden to papal authority, right? And it was a huge issue back then. It was one of the reasons why, like a lot of Democrats at the time opposed his election. Obviously, he made it, right? A lot of money and fame will do that, right? They'll get you into power and over these obstacles. But to pretend it wasn't an obstacle, I think it's just unfair.
So it was super religious back then, and it's still super religious because, of course, we made a huge deal about Obama being a Muslim, supposedly. and yeah, it absolutely, from my perspective, I've lived through the 80s and 90s politics, and I was very politically conscious in the late 80s. So yeah, it totally makes sense to say that religion has been here and has possibly been on a steamroll since after the 60s. And I think it's been a, boiling the frog, no offense, Dooby, but we have been gradually getting more and more intrusion of religion into the public sphere. And maybe like rulings, like separation of church and state rulings, like no prayer in schools, were the triggers that promoted that. But, religion before the 60s, let's say, is kind of like a given. Like, you are one nation under God. Wait, actually, that was invented in the 40s, wasn't it? Like that was not in the original.
Added then.
Yeah, it was added then. So it was kind of just a given that you are religious, but we have all these citations that, we're promising the Middle East during our founding that we are not a Christian nation, and that this is it's kind of a flimsy example, but it is one of the principles that people who believe in separation of church and state point to, is these letters to foreign dignitaries. And so I think that there is a case to say that religion has gradually encroached and in fact been the dominant reason that we have the Supreme Court we have now. And really, like you said, it is about abortion.
Who else has not had an opening statement yet?
I have not.
Me. I can go first.
I guess I'll go. All right. So the idea that this abortion argument is simply just from religion is false. I know plenty of people who are atheists, plenty of people who are agnostic, that are pro-life. And even when I talk about political policy, I make sure to exclude my religion from it. Because I don't believe that religion belongs in the state. There's been plenty of times in history when you've seen what happens when religions take over as the state. It's never turned out well. So I would simply argue that religion has taken a little bit more into the state as in the last couple of years. I think moving forward in the next couple of years, I think that will be taken back. I don't see a huge religion taking over the state in the United States. So I think it's going to be taken aback a little bit throughout the next couple of years. But yes, the last couple of years, religion has taken more and more of a presence in the state.
I can pop in. I'm just going to pull up the question again and make sure I address it all. So has it changed in the recent years or decades? It's hard to say. I think that it's changed. I think it's been changed for like a little more than like a century or two. I think religion and what it was originally, the role that it occupied in civilization, like previously, really shifted around kind of the Industrial Revolution. I wouldn't put my finger on precisely when or why. And so I know I'm being somewhat historically reductivist, but in the past, religion often served to somewhat be a counter to the power, right? So in the past, you had, for example, popes coming out against kings. And if the popes came out against kings, then it would like lose favor to the point that like King Henry VIII had to like get rid of all of Catholicism so that he could keep fucking killing his wives, basically. And then at some point, the state realized that religion is an extremely powerful institute that is essentially like motivates the population, and it somehow got kind of like absorbed into and with the state. And so now there's this really incestuous relationship with like religiosity and state power. And I think the moment that religion and state power get blended, you get an absolute like subversion of the purpose of religion. And religion is a really, really powerful tool in a society, right? So I think like religion's been kind of poisoned in North America for a really long time. I think it's been really harmful. I think we're seeing more and more people leaving church because, to be honest, church sucks for a lot of people. It's really hateful. And so it's hard to say, has it changed in the recent years or decades? I think we have this constant war going where people are becoming increasingly atheistic. However, particularly the Republican Party is really holding on to its religious like bounds, because religion has become, in many places, a way of exercising some level of power and legitimizing power. I'm very against the merging of the state and the church. This is coming from a person who considers myself somewhat religious. I think it is horrible for both the state and the religion when they're merged. I think they need to be wholly separate. And I do think that there is an increasing encroachment of trying to pull the church back into politics, which is just bad, in my view.
Hey, Dooby.
I think that the acceptance of the growing acceptance of like LGBT rights, like gay marriage, is an indication that the grasp of religion on younger conservatives is slipping and will continue to slip in the future. And I think that there's like, and I agree with Sprout, by the way, that chalking up the anti-abortion stances to like religious dogmatism is a misunderstanding of the reasons people are pro-life. I don't think it's that simple generally. But I also think that there's like a common misconception, right, that the Republicans or the right wing are, at least in the United States, I don't know about Canada. Nobody cares about Canada, let's be real. I don't know, but in the US at least, there's like a misconception that the Republicans are the religious party, right? They're like it's the religious right that's doing bad things. But in a lot of cases, the Democrat Party, the left, are just as religious. And I think the numbers are very, very close. And as to like how many believe in God, how many of them would say that religion is at least somewhat important in their lives, right? They're very close, right? So it's not like you have the logical atheist Democrats versus the crazy religious right wingers. It's much more complicated than that. And I think that given that one party, which is full of religious people, is pushing so hard for LGBT acceptance, to expand trans rights, etc., which like flies in the face of what most people would think of like the mainstream religion in the West. I think that's an indication that it is losing its grasp. Though I'd agree with like Erudite that there does seem to be a push right now to try to like sink the hooks back in, right? From some people on the right, especially. But yeah, I think it is slipping, and I think that's a good thing.
Are we done with intros? Can I sing Wick Happy Birthday?
Oh, yes. I was going to say it's Wick's birthday. We should sing him happy birthday. And then we can open up the floor. Okay. Let me know when you want to go. Okay.
No, wait.
All right, audience, plug your ears. Okay, get ready.
1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Wick.
Death of certainty. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. and many more.
And I'm finished. Thank you. Thank you for that. It's a sweet release. I really appreciate it. I just have a question back on topic. So thank you, by the way, for the birthday wishes. I do appreciate them. But it is hard for me to say with a straight face that religion plays more of a role today in politics and daily life than it did in the 1960s or 50s or 40s. One of the reasons you didn't see people being so vocal about it is because it was expected. It was the ocean that was swimming. And again, air isn't important unless you aren't breathing, right? And so one of the things that's happening is religion's losing oxygen in America. It's just losing oxygen in America at a rapid rate. And so you see these gasps for breath by religious groups. And some of them are pivoting to be more liberal, right, and progressive. Others are doubling down and becoming more staunch and conservative and more hateful and getting more desperate. There is a sense of desperation amongst the religious religions in general, and especially very ultra-conservative religious groups, because they know that their power in politics is waning to a degree that this just has never happened before, right? Because again, even when we turn the clock back hundreds and hundreds of years, at least in Western society, right? Religion in the capital was hand in hand. They called themselves the Holy Roman Empire, for goodness sake, right? They were, the God's kingdom on earth, right? That was how they justified their kingships, was by manifest destiny, this right to rule given to them by God, things like that. So again, today, we are at a point where the religious right and the religions in general have less influence than they have at any other point, I think, in our history.
Who else wants to? Oh, floor is open, guys, so anybody can step in here.
I don't know if we can go back to the Holy Roman Empire. We're supposed to be addressing
a little far back, right?
Recent history, and certainly it's more about the role of religion. And so maybe there's a case, back in World War II, World War I era, but I am not a historian, so I get it's like, from my perspective, it seems that post Nixon, Nixon was not a great figure promoting explicitly religious ideas. It was only the JFK being Catholic, and that was sort of like the argument being that he would be beholden to foreign powers, not necessarily about his religion, but being beholden to foreign powers was the concern there. So maybe it's encroached a bit since then.
Well, see, the reason he didn't address it back then, because it wasn't divisive back then. They couldn't use it to kind of divide people like that, because everyone was religious. So if you said, I'm religious, okay, that wouldn't differentiate you from the crowd in any way, shape, or form. The fact that
I don't really think it would.
Go on.
I don't necessarily think that would do it today. According to Pew Research Center, 70.6% of Americans believe or say self-proclaim that they're Christian. 5.9% self-proclaim that they're non-Christian faith, and only 22.9% are unaffiliated. Or sorry, 22.8% are unaffiliated or atheistic. So the idea that saying you're religious is like you're the odd man out. No, that you're not the odd man out at all. You're within 76% of the population.
Certainly. Yes.
Godless Granny, if you're speaking,
Okay.
I think you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have seen a major shift, though. I think that in the 80s, when Reagan decided to use the issue of abortion as a political tool, I don't think that was the cause of religion coming. I think it was a tool that they used to unite the church to vote as a voting bloc. And ever since then, a lot of churches have been giving out voting guides, and even though that's why we have the Johnson Act, and we're to stop preachers from preaching about politics, and so they did, but you would still give out voting guides to your churches saying, this candidate believes in these issues, and our church believes in these issues, but they wouldn't tell you how to vote. And I think that kind of unified the church as a voting bloc. And I do think Wick is right that we are seeing a shift now in the type of what's going on. And I don't really have the exact words for it, but instead of it being a power base, they are seeing that they are losing their power base. And I think there is a sense of desperation there, and a sense of, we've got to keep this voting bloc together so that we can have this kind of power. We can continue to wield this power.
Well, there's this really big issue, right? Like, religion is losing its oxygen in North America. And to be honest, like, I would say a lot of people who identify as Christian nowadays fucking hate the church, and they hate going to church. And they don't, for example, myself, I kind of identify as like, I'm the Christian no Christian would identify with. Most Christians on the internet just call me a heretic, right? And the issue is that a lot of these, let's focus on Christianity, because that's the one that I'm going to be able to speak best to. The issue with Christianity in so many ways is it's become so fixated on the policies within this old tradition that it's forgotten about the principles. And if you look at, for example, Christianity in the Abrahamic tradition, if you go back to what the purpose of Christianity was, it was always fundamentally about the principles, which is more or less love your God with all your heart and treat others as you love others as you love yourself. Like, those are the functional things. Those are the things that matter the most. And then the rest beyond that is, to some degree, live a good life, live within your society. Don't be like culturally degenerate as much as possible, but culturally degenerate, what the fuck does that mean when your culture is different, right?
So they know what it means.
But this is the issue, is that they don't, right? This is the issue, is that like Christian, and this is what I argue with Christians all the time, is you're so far behind the times because you've held the faith itself to a number of policies that were wrestled with and reconciled, like unironically, almost like 1700 years ago. And the problem is that culture has changed since then, and the principles can still apply. And so now we have all of these kind of much more traditional churches and this greater leaning into politics in the church. You have like Eastern Orthodox and other elements of Christianity that are actual like safe places and hiding spots for like neo-fascists and like white nationalists and white supremacists, which is a really big problem. That's so antithetical to what the policy and like what the principle of the church was ever supposed to be. And so people are reasonably leaving at higher numbers than ever before. When you talk to actually like pastors and stuff, especially since COVID, basically nobody young is going back, because we realized, the community is like kind of nice, but it's actually nicer to just like connect with my friends on Sunday on my own. And like a lot of people are engaging in some sort of like faith experience, like kind of privately or with like friends and family, because like the church has become so toxic. And so like the idea that like, Christians will kind of argue, like, of course we have to get more political, like, our traditional values are under threat. And it's like, well, the whole issue is that the church has become so wedded with the state and so wedded with like certain policies that it's decided are the most important, that it's dying. And I would argue it probably should, but this isn't to say religion bad, religion terrible. You should get rid of faith and spirituality. It's just, it has to be reconceptualized. And if it isn't, it will inevitably die, and it probably should.
Not so erudite. It already is being reconceptualized. There are already people that disagree with church. I'm one of the. I'm a Christian who preaches, and I disagree. I disagree with a lot of what the church stands for at this moment in time. I think we've gone back to the day of Pharisees. And going to even what you said, I think you're right on the principles idea, because when Jesus was asked in the New Testament, teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. Love God above all else. And then he said the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. He said those are the two greatest commandments, because it would take you away from all sin if you follow those two commandments. And so with that being said, I 100% agree with the principalities and that the church is failing society in the long run.
The godless hit on this, right? Like this kind of unholy alliance, for lack of a better term, that the Republicans made with the Christian churches, because again, religion was kind of taking a backseat. You cited those numbers, Spartacus, and I know those are high, but it used to be much higher, right? Like there has been a downward trend with people more likely to associate with atheism and atheistic tendencies. This is just something we've seen, right? And so I think, again, Erudite speaks to this, where this adherence to policy, this alliance with policy, has become a trap in very many ways. And because it's been associated with a political party, it has wedded itself to the fortunes of that political party and to its detriment.
I'm not arguing against that.
I understand, but
okay. It seems to be directed at me. I'm not arguing against that.
Oh, no. I didn't mean to direct it at you specifically. I'm just kind of trying to explain perhaps to the audience. I think that what is religion going to look like going forward when it comes to American politics is an interesting question. Do we think that they are going to pivot more and more, or are they going to double down? Like, we see a lot of churches becoming more progressive in their theology, in their preaching, in their acceptance and tolerance for LGBT especially. This is something that, in order to attract younger people, that they are seeing that they have to do. So do we think that the church, right, or religion as a whole, is going to become more progressive and still maintain a place in the political spectrum? Or do we think that the religion as a whole is going to be kind of shut out eventually, after a few last gasps and desperate grasp for power? I don't know.
I think we're going to come to a place where the atheistic community is going to get large enough that they are going to have to be taken seriously as a political demographic. And we're going to start seeing more politicians try to play to what's, to try to court that demographic. However, I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime.
I think I don't know. I don't research, and maybe it's just me, but I don't research candidates' religions before I vote for them. What they state about policies, what they say they're going to do when they get into office matters the most to me. And it could just be the fact that the moral grounds of a singular party is going to affect the way they vote. And I heard an opening statement, something about like churches giving out this is how this politician believes, this is what our church believes. I've never seen one of those. I've been a part of multiple churches and I've never seen one of those. So I don't know if that's an ended practice, but I've not seen one.
It's
pretty
way
common.
more popular in southern. Well, there's very specific sects, like certain Black Baptist churches do this, and then certain Southern Baptist churches do this as well. Those groups are broadly denounced by other religious groups, but there is increasing. Yeah, those groups do exist.
So like Westboro. Okay.
Oh no, mainline
No.
Baptist. Mainline Baptist churches do it.
Okay, so it's more than just
this isn't new either, right? Like this back in the 20s and 30s.
Well, I've never seen it in my 25 years of life, so it's new to me.
Fair enough. That's fair. But,
All right.
but again,
I do think it's overstated.
You.
I'm going to be honest. I think the idea that like Godless is saying of like there's most churches are telling their individuals to like vote and stuff like that, I think is a little bit overstated. The issue is that the people who are doing it are aggressively loud and really, really obnoxious and distinctly quite hateful. So it's the issue of kind of like the loud minority. And I would argue the rest of churches around them aren't really speaking out against them because they're like, well, they're still kind of our in group. So like, even though it's like probably not good or like we don't know how we feel about it, we're also not going to say anything, which is a huge issue, which is why it gets generalized to the rest of the group.
But to add into that, the entire one of the big reasons that Joe Biden won was that a large majority of Christians voted for him. Christians shifted their vote from Trump in 2016 to Biden in 2020. This was a recognizable shift, and it was a shift that quite literally people have attested that has given Biden a huge advantage over Trump in the 2020 election. So Yes.
Would you consider all Christians to be religious?
I mean, I guess me and you have a different term of religious. If you believe that
I'm
you're a
curious what
Christian,
your
I think that
for
you're
mine.
religious.
Because when I think of religious, just to give you my definition here, when I think of religious, it's not just the creasters, the ones who go on Christmas and Easter, right? It's the people who are in the church more often than not, who try to follow their beliefs, who it's important to them. Because there's a lot of Christians, right? Self-proclaimed Christians, who, yeah, I'm a Christian. My dad was a Christian. My mom was Christian. You know, my grandma was Christian. It's nice. I believe in Jesus, and that's it. That's the entirely of their religion, right? So I wouldn't consider that religious. So I guess for me, when the question is, what role does religion play in politics? I'm not worried about the people who just say I believe in God, right? You know, if that's all they do, that I'm discounting that group entirely. And I think of the 70% you mentioned, I think a vast majority. I don't have data on this. It's just my
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say, even I'm to that point where I disagree with I disagree with what's happening with the church. The main point, I am in the church because I believe that there needs to be a revival in the church, to make the church into what it's supposed to be, instead of like going back to this age of Pharisees, like I said. But I am in the church involved. But if I would think that if I wasn't involved in the church trying to do what I'm doing, that I would go to church occasionally, but I don't think you need to go to church to pray to God. I don't think you need to go to church to be a Christian. I don't think church is necessary for that. And I think you can have your personal relationship with Jesus Christ outside of the church. And I'm not trying to say all this to try and get people to trying to preach and to get people into Christianity here. I'm just bringing this up as an example, is that I don't think that that's necessary in order to be a Christian.
Hell yeah, I'm going to church right now.
So I think one issue that Godless kind of rose up, which is it's not actually more of the niche groups that are handing out flyers and from the pulpit telling their people to vote in a certain way. The issue is that most Christians tend to vote with their Christian ideals in mind, right? So for example, when I vote, I never really think about my own personal practice. I broadly try to think about like, what is something that I think societally would be good for most people? Because I think it's really, really important. Like, I'm very against church and state, which is why, for example, I don't want my state's laws to just be what a religion says that it should be. I think that that's a really, really bad idea, right? And so the issue is that while not all of the churches are like screaming at all their people to go vote, most Christians tend to vote in line with their Christian principles, which is to some extent saying, I want to make sure that my leaders are advocating and representing Christian moral law within our policies. And the issue is, if we do this, it is inherently causing some link between church and state. It must do this because that's what we're voting for. So that's going to be the effect on policies. And so this is where it's like, I don't know how to do this with Christians, but basically be like, maybe vote for what's good for the society overall. And you can make certain private decisions about like whether or not you want to get an abortion or whether or not you want to wear a condom, whatever else you want to like worry about.
Not so erudite. So religion, I mean, so morals come from morals do come from faith. It does
Not
come from religion.
State laws don't.
Can I? All right, thank you. So morals do come from faith for people that are in that faith. Morals do come from religion, people who are in that religion. That is their background. That is how they believe. That is where their morals come from. And to that point, do you think that anything that's in the Bible should no longer be included in law? Where do you draw this line as to, oh, that's too Christian? That's too Christian to be involved in law. I don't know where that line is going to be drawn. I think when you draw that line, it's going to be drawn ambiguously.
Let's let him finish.
Okay.
I think when you draw that line, it's going to be drawn ambiguously and without any kind of actual factual basis. It's just like, that's where I feel the line should be drawn. It's going to be different for everybody.
So this is a really popular talking conservative point, right? Where they say like, because it's not based in some sort of like divine command theory or deontology, that it's just ambiguous. And it's like, well, it's not really ambiguous. What we typically use like in a utilitarian framework, because it's going to be to some extent reasonable belief, and reasonable belief can be informed by multitudes of things. For example, I don't think a secular society is going to be like, you know what? murder is actually kind of base. Let's do it. Because you don't really want a society, and society isn't really functional if the state doesn't protect your certain like agency to some extent. And so the idea that like, well, what do we base it on? It's like, it's what we already base it on, right? We already basically base it on some level of dialectic conversation between what the citizens are willing to put up with, what certain things they want protected, and what in certain things they would like to be able to do, and a negotiation of the state of how that actually plays out. And typically that's based on a mixture of reasonable belief, right? Is it reasonable to believe that society would be great if we just like allowed unequivocal murder of everyone? Probably not. I don't think that would be reasonable to believe. So you don't need a Bible to tell you murder's wrong. You can pretty reasonably deduce murder's probably not great for society. And so I get murder's a really simple one, but you basically do this process for all of policy within states. And this is, I'm going to argue, this is actually how states make this. I would argue Christians just post hoc justify their feelings about certain things by using the Bible.
I would argue. I would simply argue that this is their moral standpoint. This is where they are coming from morally, and that's what they believe should exist. And if you have especially in a system where we are democratic, when you have a system like that, the more people that believe this is where it should be morally, that's going to be instituted into law because of democracy. Democracy is going to allow them to vote people in who believe the same moral stand grounds that they believe on.
But
and
does legal or illegal mean moral? Right? Does legal or illegal mean moral?
If it's popular,
immoral to jaywalk?
I don't think it's immoral. I don't think it's immoral to jaywalk. No.
Yeah, me neither. Right. So the idea that legality has to inherently be moral, or that people need to just vote based on their morality, doesn't seem to be true. For example, I might say I decide. This isn't my position fully, but say I decide I am fully morally against all forms of abortion. I can live out my life where I never do that action. I never commit the immoral action. But the idea that now I get to tell others necessarily that it is, when there's this moral conundrum of whether it is or is not moral, seems a little bit absurdist, right? And this is the issue, is that Christians take morals, and the whole point of the Christian Bible is it's all about you. It's all about you and your relationship to God. You don't need to fucking control other people. It's not about them. Like, get the plank out of your eye before it. Like, the whole Bible is literally like, stop obsessing about other people's sin.
I'm not saying that, but when you have the large majority, when you have the large majority of people that are voting towards a certain thing, it's typically going to go through because you have the large public support for it. And with that being said, you're going to have that large public support. And if the large majority of Americans are Christians that are going to vote based on their morals that have been founded in Christianity, that's not the religion taking over the state. That is the populism voting.
Yes, it is. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Honors the society that you're within. This is how the original church actually operated. The idea that we now need to impose on Caesar our morality never existed. Jesus never did this at all. I don't know where this idea came from. I don't give a fuck what the Romans did. I don't want to be a Roman. I want to be like Jesus. I don't give a fuck what the Roman Catholics did.
The Romans were pretty, their morals were kind of like all over the place, right?
Well,
I don't think most Christians do get their
Christians.
Morals from the Bible. I think they say they get their morals from the Bible, but most Christians are far more moral than the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible thinks that genocide is okay. The God of the Bible thinks that murdering children is okay. And most Christians are better than that.
That's not. This is kind of a bastardization of the Bible.
Are you referring to the Old Testament godless?
Yes.
Are you okay? So the Old Testament is gone. We're no longer underneath these laws, underneath.
But
these
isn't
rules.
it the same God? Isn't this the same Bible?
Well, you could argue, to be honest, that maybe it isn't. Like, when you form a new contract with a new people, maybe it's the same God, but the contract's changed.
Is that how it works? Is that how the old?
It's called the New Covenant.
It's called the New Covenant, and it's considered essentially a new binding contract. So, like, God changes the rules.
Yeah, unless you ask that guy Paul, and then he kind of says, we should still be super mean to gay people.
But wait a minute, why was it okay before? Wait a minute, why was it okay before though? Why was there a contract before that was okay?
Well, the issue in understanding. If we want to get into a theology conversation, we can, but like, we have to be very self-aware of the fact that we're talking about a script that was an oral tradition long before it was ever written. So a lot of these stories aren't even necessarily true. Do you think, actually, unironically, his name is literally suddenly escaping me. Samson killed hundreds of thousands of people with a jawbone. I don't think that literally happened, right? These were stories because ancient civilization concocted its understanding of its culture through oral traditions and mythologies, and then it turned those into like scripts. And the issue is that modern day Christians try to read this like a fucking didactic scientific textbook, which it was never supposed to be.
Yeah, it's basically a testament or a history. But I guess back to
Can
bring it back, right? To bring it back, okay, to politics and religion's role in politics. I forget if it was Sprout or Erudite who said this, but they said something very interesting, right? About how we shouldn't be imposing our morals on other people. But there is an argument to be made, and I don't agree with this argument, to be very clear, but this is to put I have a lot of relatives who are very, very religious. And the idea that you would allow someone else to murder a child when talking about abortion is just anathema to them. It's something that
Christians are obsessed with other people's sin.
Will not, right?
Yes,
but
I would
it's
argue.
not just look, to ask you directly, like if you saw someone being killed, a child being killed, and you did nothing to stop it, in your framework, you would consider yourself immoral, correct?
Yes, that would be an immoral action if you just stood by while someone's being killed, and you could have done something to stop it. That's an immoral action. Yes.
That is what they think of when they think about. It's not imposing their will; it is preventing the death of a child, right? It is preventing other people from literally murdering kids.
But this isn't didactic. Like, find me a point in the Bible where it says if you see somebody trying to murder.
It doesn't matter why they believe it or if it's reasonable. It's what they believe.
I understand that it's what they believe, but what I'm telling you is that the modern conception of most Abrahamic religions are super, super bastardized and have been for a really long time, right? And so, like, a lot of times when I talk about religion, people try to attack me from the viewpoint of what like modern day Christians espouse, and I'll just tell you, you're right. They are wrong and stupid. That's ridiculous. This religion was never supposed to do that in the first place, and I don't know why they're telling you this. The idea that you need to vote because of your religion, find that somewhere for me in the Bible. Like, where the fuck does that need to happen? Find that for me within the tradition of the history itself.
Not so erudite. It was never supposed to prevent. So you're telling me that Christians were never supposed to prevent, like, if they could, other Christians from sinning, which is just by and far incorrect. If you read Ephesians, if you read Philippians, if you read 1st and 2nd Corinthians, if you read any of Paul's letters to the churches, he's correcting the churches on what they're doing and how to become a better church, although through a very loving manner. So if you're saying that it's all about yourself, the New Testament would simply disagree. Paul obviously made it not all about himself. He cared very much for the churches that he left behind in Philippians, Ephesians, Corinthians.
What was Paul's relationships to these churches? What was his relationship? Did he know them?
He raised the church. He raised the church. Yeah,
exactly. What is my relationship to godless granny's like family? Do I have any relationship with them?
No.
Then why the fuck am I talking about their life?
Okay,
that's the whole point of this shit. Yes, it's in relationship. So if I'm your best friend and you're doing something immoral, there might be space. There's actually procedure set out about how to do this. But other than that, shut the fuck up. Stop worrying about other people's sin. If you're that worried about, like, unironically, focus on your relationship with God first and foremost. And then after that, maybe he'll prompt you to talk to somebody. But the idea that you're supposed to save the world when Christ was literally created is insane.
Jesus said this in the New Testament. He said, pure religion undefiled before God is this: to help the sick and the elderly, to clothe the clothless, to feed the starving. Like, the whole point was to help other people, right? So this idea that it was all about us and our personal relationship with God is true, but how we show our love, because his 2 great commandments, to love God and to love thy neighbor as thyself. He instructed his apostles to go out and love each other as I have loved you. So again, I just think,
is it loving when I see somebody trying to bludgeon a 2-year-old? Is it loving to protect the 2-year-old? Obviously, yes. If a woman is carrying a fetus and it means that she will inevitably become impoverished, she doesn't want to carry it. It's very young and in its first trimester. Is it loving to force her to carry it? Is that loving your neighbor?
So the thing is, the people that are like anti-abortion can you let me answer the question? Thank you.
Sure.
The people that are anti-abortion, that move towards like a complete ban on abortion, they view as loving the fetus. Like the fetus has a right to survive, and it should survive. They view that as loving their neighbor and trying to protect.
The problem is the mother is the neighbor too.
Life.
Yes, but the mother is a neighbor too. And to think that it's just like unnuanced in this way, like this is a thing. If anyone's been in a relationship, love is complex. Love is extremely difficult to do. Sometimes when you love somebody, you have to be willing.
Arrive at the same conclusions as you have.
I understand that, which is why religion has no fucking business having state policy.
I agree, but we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of those who do think it does.
I'm telling you, unequivocally, they're just wrong.
Again, I don't think you understand what that
religion wrong.
I'm so sorry. I do want to give us a spot for super chats. We've kind of closed up around the last topic here. I'm going to read some super chats, and then if you guys want to continue to talk, feel free. But people who need to leave as well can feel free to leave. So I'm just going to read a couple of super chats here. Okay. Zelix Leo said, Star's panel has been epic. Also, happy birthday, Wick. And he also said, this is for Star and Soy, the only ones that sang. I'm sure other people sang. Chris says, where in the Bible would Christ support the proliferation of weapons made to kill, refuse refugees, or support the death penalty when it happened to him? Does anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, well, Jesus used slurs.
I blame Paul.
And he used the whip to drive out the bankers, right?
Wait a minute. What?
Well, so Jesus, when he was right before he was taken by the Roman soldiers, he instructed the disciples. He said, "Do you have any swords? If not, sell your cloaks and go buy one." And a cloak was something that was involved with your identity. So selling your cloak would have been a very, very symbolic way of like, at any cost, go get a sword. And at that point, they said, we have 3, and Jesus said that's enough. And so if we're going to talk about like self-defense and having weapons, these were swords that Roman soldiers would have. So yes, I think Jesus defended the right to self-defense and defended the right for you to quote unquote carry arms. And yeah, I don't see any ambiguous in between those.
Whoa, thank you for the raid,
any
Mr. Geek.
Way of knowing
wonderful to
exact
see you.
words of someone
Thanks for the
that lived that
follows,
long ago,
Astrolycus
when there
and
was
Rakasan.
no one that took those words down. He never left us any writing of his own, and nobody wrote about what he said until 70 years later. And yet you think we know the exact words of what he said?
Do you believe the words of philosophers?
Not the exact wording, no. The general idea, but the exact wording, no.
Okay, so the general idea. So even the general idea of that would have been to go get swords, right?
Well,
wait, but Sprout,
you have to also look at the fact that the Bible, according to the Bible, Jesus also told him, "He who lives by the sword dies by the sword," and told him not to use swords. So
yes, he did.
Bible argument. He also said
it's all within context. That was in a different context, but yes, he did say that.
But how do you square what you said earlier with like turn the other cheek, and if someone tries to see you
turn the other cheek is
hand up. Hold on. Wait. I wasn't done speaking. I'm gonna read it out for you, right? Because I didn't remember this like verbatim, but it's You've heard it said that an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek too. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Do not resist an evil person. How do you get from there to stab somebody with a sword if they attack you?
So first off, the sword was to protect the disciples because the disciples were getting ready to go through a very, very hard time. Turn the other cheek is one of the most misunderstood verses in the Bible. Back then, it was unrighteous to hit someone with your left hand. And you could only do an open hand slap. It was also unrighteous to reach around and slap from the other side. So if you got slapped and you turn the other cheek, you are defending yourself by showing them this cheek. because your other cheek is hidden. It was unrighteous to go around and slap, and it was unrighteous to do a backhand. So you are protecting yourself by turning.
Do
the
not
cheek
resist
and
the evil person.
making them do
Don't
something
let
Someone's trying to
unrighteous.
take your coat. If someone's trying to take your shirt,
this
hand
is
over your coat
exactly
as well.
why modern day Christianity is wholly bastardized. They take this ancient book that honestly you need scholars, secular, ideally scholars, to actually riddle through, to figure out what the fuck they're even talking about. And then they make didactic claims about what state policy should be. That's why it's insane.
Did I say anything
Okay.
state policy in that? No, I did not.
Okay. Well,
Earlier.
so I just want to, I want to give also the other part of the question was where in the Bible would Christ support refusing refugees or supporting the death penalty when it happened to him? Anybody want to answer that or no?
He was very clear
Jesus.
that we need to help those who are helpless, and refugees, right, are some of the most helpless groups. Like, again, I will agree with everyone, and please don't get it twisted, right? It's very clear that Christ, in the words of Christ, in the life of Christ, he was very anti-violence, right, in most cases. He was very much for, he was very against rich people, to be specific. He was very against rich people. It was harder for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle, or a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, than a rich man to get into heaven. I understand
Comrade
the needle was
Jesus.
a class, right? Like, but he was very much into loving everyone and to accepting everyone, but right,
Unless you weren't part
at
of
the
his
same
cult.
time, again, he did flip those tables. Like, there are some things he did not tolerate, and again, he called Herod a fox. He used the slur, right? Like, so, like, when it
Like,
comes to
who
a
cares?
death penalty and things like
if
that.
he'd been alive in the 60s, he might have given people Kool-Aid. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, it
Yeah,
just seems
the
weird that
death
we're,
penalty thing, like, he didn't actually speak out against the death penalty either. So, I mean,
So Testicle
The death
Johnson
penalty is
also
based, by the way.
submitted. Testicle Johnson submitted. We can get into that some other time, Dooby. Testicle Johnson submitted a super chat saying Jesus once spit in the eyes of a blind man to cure him of blindness. So to be Christ-like is to spit in the eyes of the blind.
Well, if you read the Bible like most modern day Christians do, abso-fucking-lutely. But guess what? Modern day Christians, they bastardize the book. So don't listen to most of what they say about the Bible. It's bad.
Okay, and then Chris also says, Paul wrote his letters based on the assumption that the world would end in his lifetime and Christ would return. That's
It was not
interesting. Is
based
that
on
true?
assumption. It was
There's
not
the
based on
theory.
that assumption.
there is a
You-
theory.
Paul was crazy.
Paul did not base it on that. Paul did not base it on that assumption. He based it on that the world was going to end, Jesus was going to come back, but he did not
But
base
let's
it on
be
the
honest,
assumption that
Paul
it was
was
going to happen
probably
in his
gay.
lifetime.
Just
Paul
to put
knew-
that out there.
Well,
He's-
I mean,
I think
Jesus
I
was
think
probably.
Paul well.
For sure.
Okay. So
Five
Jesus
of the
was
letters-
probably. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Five of the letters that used to be called the Pauline letters, and many churches still call them the Pauline letters, are known forgeries. And so I don't see how you could really base
Even
your.
even the harshest critics of Christianity will attribute the letters to Paul. Even the harshest critics, there's extremely
Some
harsh
of
critics.
them.
Let's
not
let
all,
Gallus-
they will say.
Wait a
they
minute.
will say-
Let's let Gallus Granny finish what she was saying, and then you can go, Spartacus. Okay.
Okay.
Well, First and Second Timothy, Ephesians, and Titus are pretty much accepted by most scholars as being forgeries, but they claim to have been written by Paul, and so I don't see how you can
I
take
think
a
it's
book that has.
disputed. Everything I look up says that those books are disputed. It's not sure who necessarily wrote them, which
It's not
points to
sure
an issue
who.
with the canonization for sure. But that's a whole other
there's-
conversation that I'd probably mostly agree with you on.
Yeah, the whole like idea again. What we know today as the books of the Bible was actually voted on in the Nicene Creed. Like, it's called the Nicene Creed because the Council of Nicaea gathered together, and because there were a lot of works at the time, and they needed to codify these things, and so they brought in all the priests and debated and had all this discussion, and they decided these are the canonical works, and this is what it is, and this is what we have. In modern day Bibles. So
It was also a lot of that was to try to counter the Marcion Bible.
yes, there were competing works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So somebody in the chat said that Jesus actually didn't spit in the eyes of a blind man. He actually spit in the dirt and then rubbed that dirt in the
Into
blind
clay.
man's eye.
Clay.
That's
So
true.
I
If it's a
didn't know
bank
that.
shot, doesn't
According to the
count.
mythology.
it just gets worse. Spitting in the eye. It's not spitting in the eye. It's spitting in the dirt and then rubbing that dirt in the eye.
It was a miracle, and the blind man received his sight. If you think that if you think you can perform miracles, go try, I guess. And if you can't, then you're morally incorrect.
The Bible says that all Christians can perform miracles, because if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can mount.
They're right. They can. The faith of a mustard seed. Yeah, it's very hard to have that much faith. Yeah, it's very hard.
Okay. Yeah. What was that?
Can you grow Wick's tooth in real time?
Please. Yes.
I just grow his tooth.
Calcify me, baby.
Beg you. Grow his tooth.
You could perform that miracle, not in real time, but you could donate to my GoFundMe, right?
Okay, so Testy is saying here that's a separate story. Testy says that's a different story. Jesus both spit directly in the eyes of a blind man. Spitting in the dirt and then rubbing it in his eyes was a different blind man. So yeah, he did it twice. Is that real, or is he making that up?
Well, it could have been that. So there are 4 books: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and their perspectives. There are minor differences between how they account for different things.
I'd be curious to pose a question, though, because I agree with a lot of the criticisms of the Bible, but it's interesting that when people start mocking Christianity, if you bring up something like the Quran, most people are way more hesitant to mock it nearly as openly or like vitriolically, which is a little bit...
actually.
Yeah,
that is true. Yeah.
Muhammad is a pedophile, by the way.
Oh my God, Dooby, you're going to get a fatwa put on my head. God,
a lot of these ancient texts, when you put like a modern day analysis to them, like fall apart pretty hard for a lot of reasons. I just think it's like something to kind of be aware of. Like, if you're concerned about like Christians being like highly defensive and like vitriolic and stuff, I think laughing at them while also being unwilling to call out like other religious groups feels extremely targeted and probably is going to be less successful in having those people like.
And to be fair, that a lot of the stories that you see in the Bible, you'll also see in the Torah, or you'll also see in the Quran. Yep. So if we're making fun of one of these stories from Christianity, we're technically making fun of the same story in the Torah or in the Quran. So if it's true that this guy not only spit into 2 blind men's eyes, I wanted to highlight a joke that somebody made in chat. Somebody in chat said the blind man got sight and started to scream, "I have dirt in my damn eyes." So I think it's pretty good. But yeah.
Quick reminder that the Talmud actually says that Jesus is boiling in excrement forever. It's super interesting.
Okay. There's also a line in the Psalms that just talks about having an STI, which is super fun. It's not the one that most moms cross-stitch into their pillows. Yeah, it says, "Oh Lord, I have a painful disease in my loins." It's talking about like the writer was like sleeping with like a lot of prostitutes is kind of what it's theorized, and probably got chlamydia or something like that.
The book of what's that?
God loves all things.
Song of Solomon.
Moanings of
the Song of Solomon is essentially like a erotic novel that was written by the husband about his wife. So if you ever look up the Song of Solomon in the Bible.
No, I found it. It was Psalms 38. "For my loins are filled with a loathsome disease. There is no soundness in my flesh."
That's what I like to give people. It's my favorite Bible verse when they ask for it, so that if they look it up, they'll be like, "Ooh."
I like that. I'm going to start using that too. I got to find one from the Quran to use when people ask me.
Yeah. And the STI lines from the Quran that you can use is a little bit more of a didactic book, so that might be trickier.
That'll be my sign at the next ball game. Psalms 38:7.
Look, I'm not saying you can't be bigoted against Christians. Let's just be bigoted against all religions equally then, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I personally think, so I mean, this is like, I think most religions put women in a secondary like place in society. And that's kind of like why I have
making arguments against him. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Wow, Dooby. Wow.
The women's stuff is also tricky because if you look at the time that they were written, they were like foremost some of the most aggressively feminist things where they like gave them any rights at all and stuff like that.
Okay,
so like,
yes, that might be true, but still, like today, and yes, even then, even if it's comparative, even if like for that day it was more feminist, I would still say that it still put you in a secondary position regardless, right? Like,
Yes.
are you
But if
are
the
you not still secondary?
Right. So if the principle is all about like protecting the vulnerable, and if in every like historical era the religion consistently tried to like push forward women's rights, you would argue in a modern 22 era, probably what you should be doing is still pushing forwards women's rights. There's no reason to believe that just like suddenly in 300 AD God was like, all right, that's enough. Women have enough rights. We're good. Like, why would that happen?
I mean, there's a parable about the apple and Eve and all that, and
Yeah, well, I
I'm
always
memeing.
say
That's a
yes,
bad
there
meme.
is the mythos from like 10,000 years ago about Adam and Eve. But again, I wouldn't use something that's from 10,000 years ago and try to map it on didactically to a present day. That feels like a bad way to look at ancient
You just pick and
literature.
choose. You just do whatever, and you justify it by pointing at random stuff in that book, and that's
I
the way it
don't
works.
think that that's what I'm doing. I'm actually having a very
I know,
consistent view
I'm-
of ancient
I'm-
literature.
I am memeing now.
somebody in chat says in the original Aramaic, the word used to mean virgin meant untouched by sin, not untouched by men. Yet we write laws based on sexuality because of it. Is that true?
No,
Who knows?
If you take virgin back from English, there are several different Greek words it could mean. And so therefore that's where they're getting that from. The Greek word that was used in the Bible wasn't untouched by sin.
Well, if it's Hebrew, then the Greek wouldn't matter. But yeah.
Well, yeah, Hebrew, Greek. I was more so
Very
talking about the I was more so talking about the New Testament when I was saying
Yeah,
that.
but the Old
So,
Testament is
the New
also
Testament was
pretty
written in
obsessed
Greek.
with virgins as well.
There's an old joke that a young monk arrives at a monastery, right? And he goes and he's translating and things like that, and he wants to see the original text. Like, this monastery has the original like scriptures. Okay, so he's eventually allowed in, like after going through all the tests to make sure he's going to treat all the paperwork right. And he goes in and he spends, and he's down there for a week in this vault, right, with the original manuscripts. And they get worried, like, he hasn't come out in a week. What's going on? They come in and he's crying and he's drinking and he's screaming and he's all mad and he screams, "The word was celebrate! It was celebrate!" I'm glad you got it. I'm glad you got it.
I was going to say,
So
virgins have been beloved by ancient cultures for a long time. Just ancient cultures in general were very obsessed with virgins. Probably in large part, we would argue, like evolutionarily, because it's like proof of fathership. But yeah, if you go to most ancient cultures, you're just going to find a weird obsession with virginity of women.
So I think that kind of concludes the end of the panel. Feel free to hang out if you guys want. I also don't want you guys to feel like you have to stay if you don't. If you want to go, if you have stuff to do. So, thank you guys. Let's do a shout out for everybody around the panel. We'll start with Sproutacus. Shout yourself out, Sproutacus.
Yeah, so I am The Sproutacus. You can find me at Twitch and Twitter underneath the same name, The Sproutacus. Again, I talk politics. I review content. This Tuesday, I will be in a debate, and then this Thursday, I'll be in another debate. Actually, a Thursday debate is going to be about Christianity and about the church and the church's role in society. So if you're more interested in my views on the church, make sure you tune in for the Thursday debate at twitch.tv/thesproutacus, and I'll be announcing it again on twitter.com/thesproutacus.
Cool. Wick.
So I go by Wick on the internet. You can find me at twitch.tv/deathofcertainty, all one word. I host panels on Mondays and Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern. Tuesdays I have a call-in show, and Thursdays kind of a free day. This Monday, we are having Lactoid. We are having Franklin and Slash. We're having LSP and a few others to discuss, do we even need the Supreme Court anymore, right? And yeah, it should be fun. Come check us out. Thanks for letting me on.
Awesome. Godless Granny.
I'm Godless Granny. You can find me on YouTube or Twitter. I do atheist content. I also do support of women's rights and LGBTQ rights. And thank you also, Stardust. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Seattle.
Hey, my name is Carl. I am Soyaddle. You find me at soyaddle.tv. That's like Seattle without the C and put in the soy. I am an expert at soy, and I like to soy out about nuclear energy and the environment. And this is where I'm going to be this year. I will be the opening speaker at Thorium Energy Alliance Conference. You can find that at thoriumenergyalliance.com.
Awesome. Not so erudite.
Yeah, my name is Not So Erudite. I super appreciated the conversation, everyone. I'm sorry for trolling on the Sprout as hard as I did, but I blame Dooby first and foremost. He started that. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking with all of you. Godless Granny, it was super cool to hear your perspective. I haven't been able to talk with such a good faith anti-theist in a long time, which is super nice. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Last but not least, Dooby.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. That's it. Love you guys.
And he's going to be joining me to destroy the opposition tomorrow in that debate with Alex Stein is going to be there. I think Lauren Southern, Nick Fuentes are all going to be there. So we're gonna
Should be a good time.
We're gonna go slaughter some people metaphorically. So yeah, it'll be great. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, everybody's leaving. Okay. See ya.
Whoop. See ya. Hey, what's up? My camera back? Oh, I closed it. I guess I need to toggle my cameras. Yeah. Toggle that camera and see if it comes back. Anyways, let's find someone to raid while I figure out my camera. Ooh-ba-doo-ba-doo. Oh, the gameplay. I could turn on the gameplay. Let's do gameplay. Uh-oh. Still there? Good, good. Still there. Here we go. Oh, that's not the way I wanted to go. That's the way I wanted to go. All right, so what's going on? Still in the Eternal Borg War on server 76. And Granny's pretty cool. I think, I don't know. I don't spend enough time streaming and looking up people to stream with. So, so I think I probably won't reach out to her just because I'm lazy, but she's pretty cool. Why is... Okay. Something is up with my camera. Oh. Oh, I see. Okay. There we are. So, the recording of the gangs? The gangs. Oh, yeah, the... I've been documenting a few things that goes on here. Yeah, it's pretty funny, the whole array of people who are fighting over territory here, and they will all put their best members into one of these alliances so they can try to attack territory. And it has been extremely effective, and all sorts of people are mad at them about this. So it's pretty hilarious. Yeah, it's Oof, I'm over it. Where am I at here? I am grinding through my triple faction lock. Right now I got the 10 million on Federation, so good there. I'm about to unlock one of these ships, and about pretty far into this one. It's like I might, if I wasn't doing anything else, I might be able to get it tomorrow. If you're attacking territory, you basically spend resources and initiate an attack according to the schedule. So you're allowed to do takeovers by a set schedule. Let's see, the next one that's coming up for my group is Xi'an. And so it would be here. And so it would be this group pushing into here using, and what you have to do is you put ships in this map, and then you also take over these capture points. And so that's it. That's the method of attacking territory in this game. And so I'm not terribly exciting in game right now. I'm grinding from ship to ship to ship, and that's what I'm doing. So actually, I know that I'm winding down. So sorry to say, I will be raiding out. What do we got? I see Ico. I see the Sprouticus. Let's raid into the Sprouticus. Okay. Well, cool. Good to see you, Piprod. Thanks everyone for stopping by. I'm going to raid into the Sprouticus. Very, very cool. It was good to see the people on the panel. I haven't been on stream with Stardust in quite a while, so thanks for stopping by.